All right, welcome everyone to the regular board meeting for May 8th. I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask that you all rise and join in the singing of our national anthem. Thank you, everyone. Have a motion to approve the consent agenda items. Sorry. Oh yeah, roll call. Sorry. Director.
Trustee Buckland.
Present.
Trustee Carpenter.
Present.
Trustee Garrow.
Present.
Trustee McPherson.
Present.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Vice Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee McRae.
Present.
Chair Petersman.
Present.
Regrets from Trustee Richards, Trustee Swan,
Present.
and Student Trustee Sidney Collins.
Present.
Okay, a motion to approve the consent agenda items. Trustee McMillan, seconded by Trustee Karkner. That passes. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, can I get a motion to move into committee of the whole? Trustee Garrow, Trustee Karkner. Okay, that two passes. Trustees, this evening we have the final report on the Accountability Framework Work Group. And I will be presenting that report, and in doing so I'm going to vacate the chair to First Vice Jeff.
Thank you, sir.
The floor is yours.
Okay, so the next item is the accountability framework. I'm going to ask our Chair Greg Petersman to present this, and I would expect that we would all give him the same respect that we would give anyone else at that podium. In other words, it's fair game. Floor is all
Great.
yours.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. I don't have the timer. All right, thank you, First Vice McMillan. This evening I wish to present the final report of the Accountability Framework Group. This group was formed a couple of months ago. Well, first of all, I'll tell you, this is the overview for the presentation. Do the introduction, give you a sense of why the model that we're proposing tonight, give you some draft critical success factors, which will make a lot more sense when you hear about the model, and give you some of our recommended key result indicators. So going back to May of 2012, the board voted to create a work group. And our job, the work group's job, was to create a reporting framework to provide the trustees with an additional tool to fulfill their mandate. I was very pleased to be joined by Trustee Buckland, Trustee Karkner, Trustee McAllister, Trustee McDonald, McMillan, and at the end we also had some help from Director Thomas as well. So why? Why did we go down this path? In the report, the written report you have in front of you, I gave a very lengthy introduction, sort of covering the entire history, sort of starting with the formation of the board as a result of the Amalgamations Act and moving through the history to show the development of the board. There were a couple of key stops along there that I think started the trustees thinking that they wanted to move to a different level. 2003, everyone will remember, Director Thomas came in with the instructions to improve morale and put us on a firm footing, firm focus of student achievement. He right away developed a strategic plan, which led into crew, and you're all familiar with that history. With the arrival of Bill 177, the trustees' role was further clarified, and the roles of trustees and chairs and directors was defined. And in that there was some instructions on additional duties that the Education Act expected boards to comply with. That, coupled with our own sort of sense that we wanted to have a oversight relationship with our strategic plan and our budget, caused us to start this journey several years ago. But I think it's fair to look at the two statements on the slide: continuous improvement and operational excellence, something that we have the expectation of our senior team and our schools, and as a result, I think it's fair that we hold ourselves to the same standard. So that's the why we went down this path. So our first job as a work group was to review the various processes that were available to us to monitor performance. And we zeroed in on two approaches. One was the balanced scorecard, and the other one was the key performance indicators. We read two books which are listed in the works cited, and through the work group we decided that the approach that we were going to take was to use the philosophy of, or use the principles of, the key performance indicator and what that brought. One of the things we liked about it was that we could see that its structure was very similar to our own strategic plan. This was one of the challenges that we identified early on, that we didn't want to start a whole new process. We didn't want to start a whole new strategic plan. What we needed to do was find a way to kind of absorb the strategic plan in what we wanted to do, or have the strategic plan absorb us. So this particular format, reminded us very much of our own strategic plan. You can see there's a mission, vision, values, the strategies at the top there, and that really spoke to us. So we adopted the ideas by David Parmenter, who has written several books on key performance indicators, and he's actually written a book for governments and nonprofits, which I guess we would say was our chief guide on adopting a process. You'll see that there is a line here called critical success factors, and in Parmenter's work, he talks about the title of his work is Key Performance Indicators, but really what he's talking about is critical success factors, and how out of that key performance indicators arrive. So what are your key success factors? Your key success factors are very similar to the statements that you will find in our strategic document, under the C, the R, the E, and the W. They're sort of the overall objectives, the overall goals of the board wrapped up in a statement that's clearly understood. We had, at a previous planning session, already looked at adopting the rewriting those statements. So it seemed timely that the critical success factors that Parmenter talked about fit in well with our desire to rewrite those statements as well and focus them. So that was our first job, was to look at how we might create critical success factors that we could use to drive the KPIs, the KRIs, which I'll explain in a minute. So once you have your critical success factors, then you can move to just looking at what your KPIs are, and you'll see a lot of acronyms up there, so educators should feel real comfortable. You'll see KPI, PI, KRI, and RI, and it's very, very simple. KPI is key performance indicator, PI is performance indicator, KRI is key results indicator, and RI is results indicator. So now that you have that, I'll move on. No, I'll explain a little better. One of the things that really spoke to us was how well the system divided up the indicators into the various levels of an organization. We right away, once we started digging into it, could see our relationship to this performance monitoring structure, because we could see that the trustees, the governance, are really focused on the key result indicators. So we are assessing results. Key performance indicators, when you dig into Parmenter's work, you see that it is very clearly aligned with the day-to-day operations, something that trustees know that that's not our purview. The government and the Education Act is very clear that trustees stay at a very high level, and we monitor performance from the results. You can see there he's got sort of some characteristics of the KPIs, the KRIs. We can just look at the KPIs to get a sense of what they look like. KPIs are measured daily, they're measured weekly, they are not financial. Indicators, KPI should indicate where action should be necessary, and it should give you a sense of what you should do in order to increase your performance. That's very different from what trustees are tasked to deal with. If you look at the KRIs, they're measured monthly, quarterly, yearly. They can include financial measures. They indicate results rather than actions, and they are often summarized as trends or graphs. And I think that too should be very familiar to trustees, that really does characterize the kind of information that we need in order to monitor performance. You'll see that there are lesser forms of each of those. There are performance indicators and result indicators, and you can read for yourself that they're just slightly stepped down versions of them. Obviously, key means that they're critical to your success, and the others are used to help support the ongoing operations. All right, just before I go to that, in the report that I gave you, how much time am I up yet? 10 minutes already? Okay. In your report, I gave you sort of, to give you a sense of what the difference between a result indicator and a performance indicator, I gave you a scenario, an example. And I'll retell it here because I think it helps clarify the difference between the two, because it's really key that that we understand what the difference is so that we know where our focus is. So if we look at capture rate is calculated once a year. It is informing us of a result. And so because of that, it becomes a result indicator. It's a result of the efforts that we have undertaken to attract students to our kindergarten classrooms across the board. Now, what might be a performance indicator for that might be a check that on the 15th of March, historically, 75% of the expected registrants have registered. And if on the 15th they run that report and they find that they don't have that, it should give them some idea on what they might do, or if they're over, you know, obviously that's a good sign, and maybe they should do more of whatever they were doing in order to drive the results even higher. So very clear difference. One is results, one is looking at an as the action is occurring report that actually gives some guidance on potential action. So any questions on, is that okay, Chair? Any questions on the KPIs or KRIs?
Everyone's clear on the distinction between the two and how the line is drawn in the sand? I think we're fine.
Okay, I'll carry on then. So with these two notions in our head, the critical success factors, the knowledge of KPIs and KRIs, we then went on to start developing developing what we saw as critical success factors. And I'm going to show you a draft tonight for discussion, and also looking at some potential result indicators. So here's your draft of your critical success factors. I have labeled them as we did organize them according to the C, the R, the E, and the W. That was a bit of a challenge, and I think that one of the things we need to consider is whether there is an additional critical success factor. One of the things that jumped out at us that wasn't included was our obligation to provide safe environments for our students. But something for us to look at. So you'll see that the way that they are structured is that it's more goal oriented. It gives some expectations, and then some guidance on what those expectations should include. I won't bother to read them for you. They're in your report. Any questions on the success factors? At this point, I'll also just mention I've spoken to Director Thomas, and you'll note that you've received an invitation to, I would imagine, a very popular date, a Sunday at the end of the month, where we hope to spend a few hours to look at these critical success factors. If adopted by the board, these will go into this year's CREW document and will help drive future activity. So once we finished looking at the critical success factors, we started looking at what kind of key result indicators did we want in order to check on the performance or monitor the performance, assess the performance of the critical success factors. So we are recommending the following 7 measures. No, 6 measures. 7, sorry. Yep. Start off with our graduation rate. I mean, we know about that. That's our big goal. It's a very obvious one for us. After looking at the various options out there, we are suggesting that we look at just adopting the ministry's methodology so that we can use that for comparisons to the provincial rate. So that's one of our recommendations. Net Promoter Score. The point of this is, the goal is to analyze our community's ability to recommend our board. Those that are familiar with the Net Promoter Score model, it's a question that's asked, how likely are you to recommend, and you fill in the blank here. In our case, it would be the Upper Canada District School Board. And this report would provide very good information on regionally on how our communities perceive us, as well as giving us an opportunity to dig into comments made by the detractors to see what we could do to improve the community's overall confidence in or ability to recommend the board. Graduate study is something new that we would look to undertake. This is very common in the United States. They have a big benefit that we don't have. They have centralized organizations that track the data of graduates, making it very easy for school boards to assess the data and monitor how their graduates are doing. We are looking to set up some sort of process to follow our graduates, either a sample of or probably a sample of. I don't know that we can track them all, but looking at finding a way to do that. And really, I think that the group thought that a graduate study would help test our mission statement, the notion that we prepare students for a successful life. Next one is student culture. So this gets back to a couple of the items in the critical success factors, and I believe there's some explanation of that in the report. We are looking to take advantage of the data, we hope, from Tell Them From Me if it's appropriate, or finding some other tool to use to gather information on the student culture. Also looking at a staff culture survey, very similar to the student, but run on an annual basis, and looking at sort of the effectiveness of professional development, the allocation of resources, communication, and the wellness of our staff. The next one, the school success plan progress. We saw an example of this recently and thought that it was very effective. And the goal is to permit schools on a cyclical basis to report their school success plans and a range of result indicators such as the school capture rate, PD, co and extracurricular activities, community partners, EQAO, and so on by the schools. This would be done because we have a fair number of schools. Obviously, we would have to do this over a several-year cycle. We're suggesting 4, and we would invite schools to present to the board on the activities that are going on in their school. Performance-focused budgeting is what we're trying to work on right now, the methodology that we're using to move forward on receiving information on our budget. And so we're looking at past expenditures, checking how they're aligned with our strategic plan, how they're measured, looking at the risks, and looking at corrective measures for a new budget. So those are what we're recommending to the board to use as the key result indicators. Now, one of the key parts is implementing this. And another one of our recommendations will be that the board will strike a permanent committee, the Accountability Framework Committee, which will be charged with driving this process. You can obviously see that this is a very different way for us to conduct our business. And there's going to be additional work that we will need to undertake. And so as a group, the work group is recommending that we establish this committee, which would consist of trustees, the director, and they would sort of manage, so to speak, the whole process and channel reports back through Management Council to the board. It's key to understand that the purpose of this committee is to not receive the data. That's not their purpose, that's the board's role, is to receive the data. It'll just be charged with overseeing it, making sure that the surveys are done, and working with the various people that we believe that we'll need to contract with in order to do that. So that's sort of the main recommendations, the critical success factors, the indicators, and the process to implement. Obviously, implementation is going to take some time, and we don't this is not something that we're going to have 100% up and running in September. There are some things that we believe we can start. David has talked to us about how we could start with the school success plan presentations, and we'll start working on some of the other issues immediately as well. But I would anticipate that it will take about a full year to get all of the indicators up and running. The report also shows a number of result indicators, things like EQAO, the health and safety data that we receive, and those we can add and take away as we need to. We're also recommending that these things are reviewed on a regular basis to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the organizations. I put a picture of a teacher and a student on the cover of the report that was very conscious. We need to remember that that's what we're here for. We're here for the students and to support our staff, to ensure trustees are here to support our staff, to ensure that they can deliver the world-class programming that we believe our students deserve here in Eastern Ontario. And I finish it with the last page of the crew document, and I think this is a very good symbol of us, all of us working together to achieve our goal. So, Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Comments, questions? Trustee McAllister.
I can't say very much because I was part of the report, so I certainly speak very highly in support of it. I think it is going to provide the board of trustees as well as the senior administration with a very strong guideline to by which to judge our accountability on all fronts. So I think this is a very, very solid document.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Trustee Buckland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's an excellent report, and the chairman's congratulated for bringing the group together and allowing free and open discussion and creating the document. You know, as we look at contemporary education levels and employment opportunities, I think the things we are doing here are going to more than justify their existence when you see the long-term result. For example, our graduate study, I think we do a little bit of that anecdotally, but we don't follow it up properly. And as the chair mentioned, the Americans have much more data on all of these things than we do, and so this would be an excellent one to focus on in the future. And there's some contemporary ones that we move on right away. I love that idea of a school coming here with their own success plan and saying, look, board, this is what we are doing to improve the education of our students. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Garrow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really good. How's it going to be communicated, I guess, is a sense, because what I hear from is always the EQ, all those standardized testing sort of thing. But this is much more than that. It captures so much, and I really like the idea of school success plans, but also the graduation. All that follow-up, as a community school, which I think is really reflects on the community. It reflects on us as a community in the sense that we're trying to achieve that 90% success rate. So it's really well done. Communication.
Through you, Chair. So in terms of communication, part of the rationale in going down this path was to provide trustees with additional narrative for them to use in their own communication. So it's going to be really structured for that. How we take that data and use it, one of the objectives in presenting the data is to use formats, and you'll see a little bit of it in the list of the result indicators where we're suggesting, to present this, use a stack graph, to use this, use a scatter graph. Having said all that, one of the things that we understand, and a recommendation I didn't touch on, was that for ourselves, we're going to need additional training to know how to process that data on an ongoing basis, because it's going to be much more data, and it's going to be imperative that we can grasp it very quickly. So one of the recommendations is to have somebody come in and present and run some workshops for us, and we'd hope that David would invite senior admin as well to really give us a firm grounding in how to read bar graphs, stack bar graphs, and that kind of data. And then I think that will provide us with some of the understanding on how to then take that and transmit it to our constituents and our communities.
Thank you. Any other questions? Trustee McRae.
Through you, Chair. Greg, can you just roll back the slide before this one? So that's pretty ambitious, and I guess what I want to ask you, in terms of priorities of those different key result indicators, how do you see that rolling out? What do you see being first, second, third? And then I guess you said within a year, what I was hearing you say was within a year, is the notion that we're going to get started on all of these, or
So
I just need a little
Sure.
clearer picture.
Yeah,
What-
fair
where
enough.
you're thinking
Through you,
we're
Chair.
going.
So there are some things that are already occurring so that we can move on more quickly. The Net Promoter Score, we've already run that once, so we already have a baseline to work from. The school success plans, I mean, there'll be some work that David's going to have to do, but my understanding is that can be moved forward pretty quickly. The budgeting we're already in process on. The graduation rate, those numbers are already being calculated. So then you look at the graduate study, the school culture survey, and the staff culture survey. Now, I think that it's important to recognize that this is not to be an add-on to the work done by administration, aside from the school culture survey. And that was, we looked at using the Tell Them From Me because we think that that's data available. At this point, I can't say whether the data it's appropriate to use that data, but that's our recommendation, so we'll have to explore that. But the other two, the school culture, the staff culture survey, and the graduate study are going to require outside expertise, and we will use a very similar process to the Net Promoter Score to operate those. So really, the time to get those two up are going to be going through the process of finding someone to do it, developing the surveys, and the methodology. The staff culture survey, I think that's a 6-month. The graduate, I think, could take a full year and maybe longer, just because there really is nothing to base it on here, and trying to understand how we're going to do that and meet all the privacy laws and all the other things that we have to is going to be a bit of a minefield, so it may take us additional time. But the work group thought that despite that, it was really valuable to start working towards having the graduate study data available to us, even if it did take some additional time. So it's going to be rolled out over time. As we get things ready, they'll come on and become part of the framework.
So would you see the next step as an action plan for each one of those indicators? Or how
The
would
next
you
step
go
would
about
be the
that?
establishment of the work group, and then they would set up the action plan to implement those. And I think that, as I said, there are already some that are in, and then I think that I would hope that the committee could do them in parallel as much as possible. But I'm going to leave it up to the chair of that committee to kind of drive the timing on it.
Mr. McPherson.
Some very good information here, but my question is, what am I going to use it for in my day-to-day activities as a trustee? Usually when I hear from my constituents, they're not concerned about how many kids were graduating. They're not concerned about who's going on to post-secondary. They're more concerned with things like, why have I not got support in my classroom and things like that. So I'm looking at this and saying, yeah, there's a lot of information here, and a lot of information that should be available to trustees. But how is it going to improve my role as a trustee?
Through you, Chair. If I were to ask you what, Trustee McPherson, what is give me one of the top reasons why our communities don't recommend the board. You might be able to answer that. I won't put you on the spot to answer it. You might be able to answer it, and I probably, if we were around the table, we'd get 11 different answers. The fact is that one of the top reasons why people don't recommend our school board to their families and friends is that they think class sizes are too big. Now, to me, that shapes how we talk to our communities. I know that every single time I talk to my communities, one of the first things I'm going to stress is the fact that we have the smallest classrooms in the history of public education. And I think that when we get asked for maybe supporting data on that and being able to have that, I think would be important. So I think that there are questions and there are concerns out there that we don't hear that are impacting on how people view the board. So that's one of them. But I also would hope that trustees will be able to use this information in aggregate to gain a sense of whether the money and resources that we allocate, the policies that we pass, are actually having an impact on our objectives.
Director, you want to comment?
Just to support the chair and the chair. I think from a perspective where I would be, that this would give me more confidence to know that the information that I'm sharing is very accurate. In the key results piece, you're going to have undisputed indicators they would say are results driven. And as results is what our parents and our stakeholders want to hear from us as we go through. And this will also give you a complement of results so that it doesn't come down to a simple measure that Merrickville has great EQO scores, that's why we go there. Because the people go to Merrickville, one, because there is a really good history of the culture of the staff that are dedicated to students. Students are dedicated to the school, and we also know that they're making progress in a number of areas of character, etc., that you go through. So this will be able to the other piece that it'll help us with, because we have not been able to get traction with this with the media, is the fact that our budgets continue to be very sound budgets, but not just the budgets here in the board office, which are millions upon millions of dollars, but we have had, again, outstanding budgets in our school where parents should feel very confident about the dollars and cents that go there. So this will be another opportunity for us to share boldly correct results that we don't have to guess on, that we can actually send people back to take a look at. So you're going to have something that's really going to help you with that. I think also we'll be able to remind people the truth, because like Greg gave a good example from the Net Promoter Score that it's the large class sizes that are causing the problem. And we do have for the last 5 years the smallest classes in the history. And I believe with we have 117 classes, primary classes right now. There's 16 or below. But they don't come running down to the board office to thank us for that as we go through. And this will be an opportunity to, if we can do it right, to set the table in a very clear fashion.
Mr. McAllister, thank you.
I'd like to address, if I could, through you, Chair, Trustee McPherson's question, which is a very good one, because you know, how will it affect you and me as trustees? One of the things that we've been working at least that I have in the past 2.5 or 3 years, and I've been struggling with it a little bit, is the whole issue of the strategic plan crew. And I'm somewhat forced, or I'm faced with a quandary as to how effective is the plan. Do I really know? How do we measure it? And I think the 4 components of the plan are absolutely essential, but we are looking, one of the things that we'll have a better picture of at the school level and at the ward level is the wellness of our students, and the wellness of our staffs. For example, the rate of suspensions, the rate of expulsions, bullying, which mental health. These are very big issues, and I think we're going to have better proof that we are acting on the initiatives that we have taken. So, I think it's going to help us as trustees answer, how is the board doing? How is the strategic plan functioning? And I think the bottom line for me is that it's going to enable us as trustees to confidently say, or to say with some confidence, with a great degree of confidence, that I as a trustee, or we as trustees, are being good stewards and fulfilling the mandate of the law. And that's what that's what I think our public expects of us.
Thank you, Trustee Guerra.
Yeah, again, this information, I guess the results that come from it would be really valuable. I'm faced with a situation that a lot of our parents, a lot of our students have a choice. U.S. side, Canadian side, Upper Canada, Catholic School Board, whatever, and it says. But having this information would really be such, I guess, it shows true accountability, but more transparency. Like what you say, if there's the results that come from it being valid, really lends the argument for parents' comfort, I guess, in their confidence in the school board. And we've got the 7-year tuition agreement, great, but boy, having this is really with the ammunition. And good stuff.
Trustee McRae?
Can I just add to that through you, Chair?
Certainly.
One of the things that has occurred to me over the years as chair, and I think is echoed by David McDonald when he was chair, in that role you get to see a lot, and a lot of the information that we're looking for is already there. Like it's there, and it's not that it's hidden. It's not that somebody said, no, you can't have it. Part of our mandate was to try to collect it up and put it in a format that we can use. And I know that often I don't know why, but I have bits of information that are flowing in, and I can answer questions and provide information, and I believe that everybody should have access to that and should have access to it in a format that really helps. So I think it's going to add information, but it's going to show that information's already there. I mean, if we really wanted to, we could dig into the EQAO and do our own stack graphs. That is there, but just having it sort of organized in a format that meets our needs, I think, is going to help.
Trustee McRae?
Through you, Chair. I was just so pleased to see school culture survey and staff culture survey as part of key result indicators. Because when I think of school culture and staff culture, those two have to marry so closely together. And when I think of cultures, I'm thinking about the environment that our children are being brought up and how our staff are feeling about those various situations that they have to deal with. And as I said before, I just think that those two, by adding those two to the mix, you're going to get a picture in its entirety. So I commend you on including those two. I think that's admirable.
Trustee McPherson?
The tools that I need are graduation rates, kindergarten capture, enrollment. Kindergarten capture rate to me is the biggest test. If you're not capturing the bulk of the students, especially in the western region, there's something wrong. And that reflects the public's perception of the schools. And my concern over this is that I I'm hoping it will come in a report that's customized to the individual trustee, that I can pull up my shared report and say, okay, Drummond Center has attracted 62% of the kindergarten kids this year. So when a parent calls me up, and I do get phone calls, and they say to me, what can you say to me to recommend the Upper Canada School Board? And people have options on education. That's one of the biggest challenges we face. And we're not only competing against our coterminous boards, we're now competing against ourselves, because we now offer early French immersion in each and every one of our families of schools. And it's usually centered in one school within that community. So what we are creating is a school that does not serve a community, but quite often serves the entire family of schools based upon programming. And it is very popular. And so I'm glad to see that the all-day kindergarten is coming to all schools, because we've been competing against ourselves for the last 4 years. So I'm not going to drag my feet on this, but there's information that is more useful for me than to some of you.
Thank you. Mr. Gardner.
Chair, I think through the Net Promoter Score, we may find out, as our chair has said, we have a baseline now to build that on. And we can ask the questions about our communities and what would make them attend a public school in Upper Canada. So the information you're looking for may come out in the questions in that Net Promoter Score. So the baseline is very interesting to read, and that will probably come to us at some point. I mean, the rest of the trustees, but I think that's important too, is the image that we have out there in the communities, since parents have so many options now.
Thank you. Before I go to the next step in what we should be doing with this, I want to personally thank David McDonald and Greg for the initiative of getting this started. I know it came out of a conversation, out of a conference, and from there it grew. Bringing the committee together, I won't say it was like herding cats, but in the very beginning I think it was. And I think that the learning and the growth for us as trustees was very evident. Greg, you've taken a huge leadership on this and put countless hours into it, and I know that you have one goal in mind, and that's to make this board better. And it's already a great board, and it's only going to be better for everyone when we bring something like this into place. So I want to personally thank you and David and the rest of the committee members for the hours of work you put into it, because it was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that what we need to do right now. Oh, sorry, Trustee Swan.
I thought it was a very comprehensive report. I just had some questions in regards to the financial implications of putting these indicators together. Through you, Chair, I know you had said some will require third parties. Some of the information we have already, and we can use reports already published. Will the committee be looking at that?
So when I do the budget presentation for the trustees, I'll be outlining the amounts that I'm projecting that we're going to need. You know, there is I think it's important to look at, you're going to use resources one way or the other. You're either going to use resources of your existing staff, which is going to take them away, or you're going to have to use the financial resources to hire outside people to do it. So I think, you know, just as a ballpark, we've established $100,000 as the amount that we've allocated in the trustee budget. Whether that is enough or too much, it's hard to tell without, you know, understanding these surveys and the cost associated with them. But I think it's, anyway, I don't need to comment on why I think it's necessary, but that sort of would be the financial implication. I'm also looking at, you know, using our work, like, to do some of the work as well, like our efforts, the trustees' efforts. And that'll help mitigate costs as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee McMillan. It certainly was a pleasure working with the group on this this task, and certainly it's something that I think we've been needing for some time. With respect to what some individual trustees may want or may not want or may see benefit in this, I think there are some tools that are going to be available to us as a result of what we've identified as key results indicators. We have indicated that there are opportunities to measure those types of things around kindergarten capture rate. There's an evolution associated to this, and I think the important piece is that these measures that we're putting in place, this information that we're putting in place, is more ammunition, more tools for us to be the stewards, the chief salesperson of this board in our communities. One of the things that we need to ensure that we do is tell the good story, tell the bad story, whether it's out there or not, but more importantly, tell how we're going to get better. And if we don't have the data, we don't know whether we're going to get better. And we can lay the information out there, and we can hope and pray that the media will pick it up, and we can hope and pray that people will see it on our website. But if we don't have the information ourselves, we can't be the stewards that we're expected to be, and we can't be the chief salespeople of this board. With respect to the cost, there's certainly going to be a cost associated to it, and we've identified that, and Chair Petersma will show that. There's a cost to not doing this as well. And the difficulty is we've never measured the cost for not doing it. Because when we don't do these types of things, we lose the capture rates. When we invest so much money into a graduation rate, but we don't identify how successful students are, there are those intangible costs that we have every day when we do or don't do things associated to this board. But this data will help us certainly make us better, and certainly the initial cost may be one thing, the ongoing cost will be other things, but I think we need to make sure that we identify and understand that the cost associated to not doing it is probably far greater than the cost associated to initiating the project. So I want to echo the comments that have been shared. Certainly, Chair Petersma, you've done a great job in spearheading this and getting it to this point. So thank you, and I enjoyed working with the group. David?
Thank you.
Thank you, and I also would like to thank Greg. I spent very early with the group, and then at the end, Greg gave me the benefit of a whole day with him to talk about this. And I think for the trustees, the fiduciary responsibility, that's your critical piece. Can you tell the story to your taxpayers in your community, the story of the board accurately, and feel confident about it? I think this will help you. As Greg and I spoke over this, one of the reasons why we talked about the 26 is that, as you know, the senior team, we have a variety of these tools that we use, and what we've been, I guess, waiting for to some degree, and I think was really fabulous here, next level driven. I love the title, because what's happened here is, and David, you've heard me say this forever, and so has Greg, is ask a really good question, and we're going to give you a really good answer, or we're going to go out and find it as you go through. And what I see in this report for our senior team, we're taking a look at it for the first time tonight, are a series of really good questions that some we can answer, and some we're going to have to go find answers for. And I think that what I see around here, and I just commend our trustees for having the courage to go out there and say, and David, you certainly said this several months ago, all means all, and are we still the board by which other boards are measured? And I can't help but think that this is going to drive us. For me, it's inspirational. I think when you see the trustees asking good questions, it means that we can do even more inspirational work. I do remind you, though, and Greg and I spoke about this, it means that we'll have to let some other things go. I think Greg alluded that too in his presentation, that you may be asking us for some new things, and that means that some other things have to fall off the cart as we go through. And I think that that's going to be a very important conversation to have, say that we have some old measures that we don't need or are not required or have served their time, and some new things to come on. So oversight and fiduciary responsibility, I think, is fabulous. And I also commend you with in the narrative. You've told a really good story about the hallway. You've told a great story about the living room, because we said, let's stop talking about the kitchen, let's talk about the living room and perhaps the dining room, etc. But the fact is, I think this will make us better. And I think one of the things you're always looking for in strategy is clarity. And I think that the clarity is there. So I like the next level, driven, and I don't think it'll scare anybody around that end of the horseshoe as we figure out how to best answer these. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, trustees, for the clarity and the focus.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is take this back to the dining room, and I'm going to ask the trustees, I would like to have a motion that we could take forward to the board. That the motion would be that we recommend that the Upper Canada District School Board adopt recommendations containing in the report Next Level Driven as presented May 8th, 2013. Do I have a mover? Trustee, our first, second vice chair McDonald, seconded by, it's a mouthful, seconded by Trustee Buckland, and I'll ask you to cast your votes. And Trustee McPherson.
Having technical problems.
Favor, opposed, abstaining? Abstaining, thank you very much. The motion that we recommend to the board passes. Thank you so much. And back to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, First Vice McMillan, for stepping in. It's a very different perspective on a board meeting.
Yeah, we enjoyed watching it, actually.
I can understand why people can't hear anybody on this side. All right, move on now to the continuation of our budget updates.
Before we go any further, it's 2-0 Toronto.
Trustee First Vice, you are out of order. Out of order. The rest of us are paying attention to the meeting, I imagine.
So am I.
So, do we know who's up first, or Rick? Are you Rick? Are you leading this off, or can I just start calling out names? All right, Mr. Hobbs, you're up.
Well, thank you very much.
Sorry, Trustee McAllister.
I just wanted to ask what the format will be for the presentations.
So we will have a presentation. I think you're going to touch on the high points of your piece, and then there will be opportunity for us to ask questions, and 10, 15 minutes is that what we're looking at?
Probably a little more than that for both of them.
Okay.
Both departments.
All right. You're going to do both departments at once, or do you want to do one department? Let's do them both at once, and then you can do them both at once.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do all four.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my pleasure today to speak to you about information technology services and the facilities department budget. So my intention today is to give you a little bit of an overview of the high points, as you say, of what our departments do, some of the challenges we face, some of the strategies we're undertaking to address those challenges, and how that plays out with respect to our budget for 2013-14. So again, with respect to the Information Technology Services Department, our vision for that department is any device, anywhere, anytime. And to that extent, we have two major areas within our department. One is field support services. So these are the staff that we have. Approximately half of our staff are allocated out to the field. They support about 12,000 PCs and other connected devices like iPads and iPods. They support about 2,500 wireless access points. So we have a very large wireless network. About 500 wired network switches, smart boards, projectors, SIA equipment, over 800 printers, believe it or not, in our environment that we still continue to support as well. Central Services is the group that mainly resides here. They support the PeopleSoft HR management system, financials and payroll, so that's absolutely critical for just the day-to-day operation of the organization. Our student information system, which I'll touch on a little bit later. We have an identity management system that's fully automated with about 40,000 users in it. We have a help desk system called Help Zone that handles about 15,000 call tickets per year, plus they also perform training functions. We have core network and data center infrastructure, so we actually have a very physically small but pretty impressive data center with about 200 physical and virtual servers in it. We also support a variety of other services, including email, link, eFax, and SharePoint systems. We're actually doing right now a migration of email from one archive system to another archive system. And I think we've had it in place for 6 years, and we're migrating 30 million messages on the archive system that we've accumulated in that time. The migration actually has been running for almost 4 months now, 24/7, to move those messages over. It's quite staggering, the volume of email. And of course, we develop and maintain report card, IEP, and other systems that are specific to really point needs within the business. A little bit about our operating context. One of the challenges that we're facing is kind of a year-over-year, a bit of an erosion of budget available for project work, and that's for a couple of reasons. One of the major reasons is that just with declining enrollment, the funding that we have available to direct towards IT declines as well, even though demand is escalating for the IT services. So that's putting some downward pressure on our budget. And one of the things that we find is that it's a little bit like every time we do a new project, it's a little bit like buying a car. You don't just buy the car and then have no costs after that. You have to pay for insurance and gas and maintenance and all those other things. So every time we add a new service like Link, there's another annual cost that we add, that we incur in order to maintain to provide support for the software, maintenance for the software, refreshes to servers, and those kinds of things. So every time you do something new for the organization, it eats into the budget you have available. One of the other challenges we're facing is staff constraints. Being an IT shop, we do actually have some staff turnover, so we do have staff leave for what they perceive to be greener pastures, somewhat foolishly, of course, but they do on occasion leave. And it's really challenging for us in this labor market to track down replacement staff. There just are no other IT shops within the Brockville area, which means you tend to be trying to woo people with really high-end skill sets. And we're not talking about the lower end skill sets, we're talking about very high kind of architecture oriented skill sets. We're trying to woo them from Ottawa and Kingston. And just to give you an anecdote about a recent experience, we were trying to backfill a position for someone who is in our department moved up. And we tried to get in touch with a headhunter to help us recruit in the Ottawa area for that person. And the headhunter just categorically refused to work with us and said, the starting salary is not enough, we won't be able to fill it, and we don't want that on our reputation, so you're on your own. So that is not either what you're finding is we advertise positions and we don't get people responding, or you have those kinds of experiences on occasion. And then the third piece that we're dealing with a little bit is what I call a dynamic and heterogeneous IT market space. And you know, it was kind of the IT person's dream about 7 or 8 years ago. It was the glory years where we had a vision where every device would be a Windows device, and we could manage it, and we could apply group policies to it and get it under control. And Apple, confound them, in 2010 launched the iPad, and an explosion of alternate form factors and different kinds of tools, different operating systems. And since that time, we've reluctantly gotten over our bitterness, and we've come to embrace the opportunities of the new realm. I think if you talk to people from other boards, there are other boards in the province that are still grappling with whether or not to let iPads into the board. And from day one, we've been pretty much wide open to it. Fortunately, we've been well equipped. But it does actually create some challenges for you in terms of how we still go on fulfilling your mandate to protect the privacy of the individuals within the organization, protect the personal data that we have in the organization, and all the while allow this kind of a much more freewheeling, heterogeneous kind of operating environment. So every good challenge hopefully has a good strategy to address it. And so I'll take you through just briefly some of the strategies that we've employed to address some of these challenges. Thank you. We practiced today, but we're off a little bit, so chemistry's off, maybe, I don't know. So with respect to the erosion of project budget, some of the strategies that we've been working on here is I'm a real firm believer in, if we can help it, not asking for more money. So we tend to look for ways within the envelope that we've got to find efficiencies and find reinvestment opportunities. One of the major things we've done over 8 years is centralized management and automated IT services. So a good example of this is 8 years ago when I started, we had 2 people who just managed the names of people on email distribution lists. So you know when you have the all principals distribution list, every time someone became a principal or was no longer a principal, they would get a message from HR and they would manually add that person. And all of that stuff has been automated. Moving files, adding people, taking people off, we've completely automated it. And in 8 years, we've downsized our department by about 15%. So some of it has been budget that's been liberated from downsizing that we've been able to apply to other projects. And in some cases, we've actually taken those staff and reallocated them to other purposes. So our help zone staff was entirely constituted from people who were working on other assignments. We've automated the work and moved them on to a frontline support function. We've also, as I said, strategically downsized. We've sought projects that generate cash savings. So within our department over 8 years, we estimate about $500,000 in annual cash savings that we've got from doing things like license consolidations with Oracle. So a lot of our data center runs on Oracle databases, and we've done some analysis of the licensing and consolidated there. We did a rather major Microsoft licensing consolidation a couple of years ago, deployed things like the eFax system and other ways of liberating cash that we can then reinvest. And then the next step that we're fully involved in now is moving to the cloud. So our data center is pretty much tapped out. We are going to need to start buying more physical boxes to fuel the services that we run in our data center, unless we can actually liberate capacity to move services out to the cloud, and then we can use that capacity again within the data center. With respect to staff constraints, people often talk about IT outsourcing, and we've been really strong proponents about IT outsourcing for at least the 8 years that I've been here. We actually have almost no in-house development going on. A lot of our work is actually done through companies in India. So our last development of our report card system that we had, we deal with a firm in Toronto, and pretty much all of their developers reside in India. We write requirements during the day, pass them to India. They write the code overnight, come back to work in the morning. It's in your data center, you test it, submit feedback, and do it again. So that's been a big means by which we've supplemented our staff set. And then the other big issue, sounds rather mundane, is that we do grow our staff from within. So again, the case that we had where we had a position that was backfilled, the headhunter wouldn't work with us. We did find a candidate internally, but it's not so much finding the candidate as it is making sure that when a vacancy presents itself, you've gone through the development steps with your staff over years so that you have a viable candidate to put in that position if you need to. And then finally, within the dynamic and heterogeneous IT space, as I said, again, we don't develop much in-house. So somebody asked me the other day about what about developing an app for this particular purpose that you would use on your phone. And the challenge with developing an app is you don't just develop an app for the iPhone. You develop an app for the iPhone and the iPad and 18 flavors of Android devices and PC, and it just becomes very expensive to build and maintain. So we tend to buy services where they've already got an app, as an example, or tend to reuse tools that are already commercially built, so we don't have that responsibility on us. Thank you. So this is my homage to Rick Gales. And basically what I wanted to show you with this very brief slide, and there's some other charts within the package I left for you, is that a couple of patterns within our budget year over year from 11-12 to 13-14. What you see is a slight increase in the cost of staffing, and so while our staffing complement has remained the same for 3 years, the costs have gone up a little bit. Part of that is the result of the last collective agreement, just applying year-over-year increases. There's a little bit, I think, of a shift in the benefit rate that we're anticipating for 13-14, but the cost there has gone up slightly. Where you really see a shift is in the recurring commitment section. And when I refer to recurring commitments, these are contractual multi-year commitments that we have to pay in order to sustain a service. So in that bucket, there are two main culprits, if you will, that add up to that roughly $2 million. The first one is our wide area network. So the wide area network is basically the network services that connect all the schools back to the board office and to each other. And that's what provides schools with internet access and connectivity back to the student information system and other services. And that is a 10-year contract that expires in December 2013. So what the pattern that we've seen there is that that's just a contractual commitment that we have to pay every year. The challenge I see for us going forward is that as that contract expires, we see no sign in the future of internet access or demand for internet access waning. In fact, what we see is that the demands for connectivity of schools, especially as kids to an increasing extent bring their own devices into the classroom, is going to increase. And so it's going to be quite a challenge for us. And we've been doing quite a lot of work over the course of the last year to just study how can I get more service for less money. And one of the things you'll see maybe reflected in the facilities report is that we already own a substantial chunk of our own fiber optic infrastructure, several thousand, or not thousand, but hundreds of kilometers of our own fiber optic infrastructure. And our plan is to build more of that out for the next WAN renewal contract, because I pay a capital cost up front, but I don't pay a monthly service fee to Bell for years after that. So that's one of our strategies. We've done quite a lot of analysis there. The other major set of recurring commitments is software maintenance and support. So as I said earlier, every time I buy a service, like I buy an Oracle database, or I buy a SQL database, or I buy PowerSchool, for example, I have to pay annual maintenance to those firms for ongoing technical support and ongoing software updates and patches. So with respect to PeopleSoft, for example, we pay about $250,000 a year, but it's good because we get the new tax tables every single year so that people's pay is correct. The challenge with that is that those contracts, whether we like it or not, tend to go up a little bit each year. And in fact, PowerSchool, which is our new student information system, just announced they were increasing their maintenance fees by 30% next year. So we're going from $90,000 to about $120,000. Sounds like a lot, but in the software world, it's not a whole lot. The challenge, though, is that every time we have one of those increases, it eats a little bit into the project budget that we have available for doing work. And finally, just to touch on the project budget, the challenge we have with respect to the project budget is that, again, like a car, once I buy it, it doesn't run perfectly forever in perpetuity. It requires some care and feeding from year to year. You might have to put new tires on it, and you might have to change the oil and all those kinds of things. And the same is true with a piece of software. So even though I'm running an email system and it seems to the end user that the email system runs and runs and runs from year to year, there are a lot of upgrades that go into that over the course of over the years to just keep it healthy and keep it running. So the project budget is not only funds we use to add new capability to the organization, like our link deployment, but it's also the means by which we maintain the functioning of the current systems that we have in place. So that's a little bit of a concern to us. And as you can see, from 12-13 to 13-14, we're anticipating about a 40% bite on that budget, which is going to make it challenging for us in the coming year to prioritize some of our efforts. And this is a stacked bar graph. So this is, if you look at this graph, this is just basically illustrates my point far more concisely than I just did. So the green at the top really is the budget that we have available for doing project work. This table, again, there's a longer version of this available in your package. Over the course of the year, we do sometimes up to 20 major projects within the IT department. There's lots, like I said, are the minor care and feeding of these systems that are in place, but I wanted to highlight a few for you that there's some risk associated with them. And when I use the term risk, we tend to look at risk as just being uncertainty. And when we look at uncertainty or risk along two dimensions. So the first dimension is what we call organizational risk. So if this project fails, what happens to the Upper Canada District School Board? And then the second way we look at risk is what is the actual likelihood of the project itself failing, right? So it's what's the likelihood of a project failing, and if it fails, what's the risk to the larger organization? Lots of stuff we do, a project could fail and it would not make a material impact to the board, right? So the first one that I highlighted is our PowerSchool deployment. And as you may be aware, the student information system that we have currently, which drives every element of our operation from transportation to our funding, is called ESIS. It was bought out a couple of years ago by Pearson International, and they told us that you have to replace it with PowerSchool. So we're in the process of doing that right now. The risk to the organization is significant if the project fails. So I happen to be with the IT department in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board in 1999. My first day on the job, their Trillium implementation failed. They couldn't generate timetables for the kids in high school and had to close the high schools for 2 days. So there's a significant prestige risk. Kids liked it, but there's a significant risk to the prestige of the organization and in the community if that fails. I'm confident that we're going to be ready to go in September, but I just think it's important that we constantly, as a staff, remind ourselves that there is risk to the organization. The reason why I give the project risk a yellow is because there's two dimensions there with respect to the project. There's the technical readiness of the product, and there's the readiness of the users. So we are addressing both those measures. I've actually contracted additional resources to help us with some of the technical work as we close this project. But essentially what you will see happen in August is a 2-week turnaround where we shut ESIS down after the summer semester, complete a year-end transition, which is a technical thing we do, turn on Power School, and start the school year. So it's a complex project, but I think we've got it well in hand. The WAN renewal is a slight risk to the organization just because we don't want to live with less capacity for internet than schools need for a long period of time. So we just want to make sure that as much as possible, when classrooms are using technology, they don't bump up against the limitations of the infrastructure. So again, the challenge that we have with this project is it's a tremendous amount of work to architect something this big. I'm really lean on staff, and it's just hard to get the cycles, staff cycles, to devote to these, to put out these things sometimes when there's other priorities like Power School that are more immediate needs. You're all familiar with the parent data and messaging system, or family portal as we've taken to calling it now. We're about 30% of the way through the development of that product, and again, the risk to the organization there, to me, is number one is the prestige of the organization. If we fail to deliver to parents a really smooth and graceful experience in interacting with the organization through the web for the first time with a login, and if we can't demonstrate to them that we can reliably deliver messages to them according to their preferences, and if we make a mistake or somehow get a mismatch from a student to a parent and send data to the wrong person, there's, I think, a significant but not life-threatening risk there. So we're spending a lot of time making sure we get that right. And the project at this stage of the game is we're moving along, but the risk to the project really is one more of financial and resource commitments. So that's a challenge that we're seeing there. And then the remainder are less risk to the organization. So things that we're deploying tools so that students can more seamlessly bring their own devices in, connect. We'll set up their devices so they can get their school email and their school calendar for them automatically. We're actually completing our high density Wi-Fi and cabling rollout, which has been kind of interesting because some people always ask me why it's Wi-Fi, why do you need cables for it? But we need to connect all the Wi-Fi access points together. And my IT staff have had a really good education in how much asbestos we've got in our schools. So the project has become much more expensive for the IT shop just because of the fact that we're dealing with those kinds of materials in some cases. And then the student and staff email migration, as the cherry on top, you're all familiar with the My UCDSB suite of services we put in place last year for students. Microsoft has said we are getting a mandatory upgrade to a new system called Office 365, which is great news for students, except it breaks a lot of the custom work we did to smooth the interactions that students have. So we have to rewrite all of that by August 19th because that's when they move them over. So staff are moving quickly on that one as well. And then all the other list of projects that you see in the package are going fairly well. I just gave you the bad news, so that's not bad news. With respect to facility services, again, the structure of the organization, and I'll apologize because I gave you quite a bit more information on the IT department just because it seems like a little bit of a black art to people sometimes. So with respect to facility services, again, two groups, operations and maintenance and design and construction. And so operations and maintenance consists of custodial services. We pay for the board's utilities out of that budget, operations, maintenance work, and then design and construction is really what we refer to as capital projects. The way you can think about these things is if a boiler fails in a school overnight in the winter, and it would be the operations group that would go in and if they can bring that thing back up. That might be retubing the boiler or that would be an operations and maintenance type expenditure. If a boiler failed and needed entirely to be replaced, that would be a capital expenditure. So what the way we tend to think of capital is that it's wholesale replacement of elements and to a standard of condition better than it was before. Some of the operating context for design and construction. Again, this is a recurring theme that you see happening, the same as in IT. We have an escalating demand for project work. So a few years ago, we were talking about how we didn't have enough money to do the work. Now I've got more money than I do have people. And the challenge is even though the ministry rolls out full-day kindergarten money for an addition, for example, and they kind of say, well, we're done there. The development of an addition, the procurement of an architect, the design work and everything that goes along with that is an incredibly labor-intensive task just to get it out the door. And it's the more work you have, what I always say about project management is they say you can have your project fast, cheap, or good, pick any two. And so we tend to want them cheap and good, which means they tend to be slower, right? If you want them cheap and good. And my staff are really attentive to the detail. It just means that it's really challenging with the resources we have available, staff-wise. We've had a realization that the old PTR strategy, so this is the prohibitive to repair strategy, where your school is on a waiting list to get replaced. For some schools, even with a list that's 6 deep, it's going to be a long wait. So over the course of the last few years, the ministry, I think, has released over $2 billion in funding for school replacements. Out of that, we've got 4 school replacements, which is great news, except we have about 20 more that could stand to be replaced over the course of the next 10 years. So I think the challenge that we're going to have is that, the old strategy that we might have had in previous years where we don't do anything to schools and don't do anything to schools in hopes that they're going to be replaced is probably not fair to the staff and students that are living, learning, and working in those facilities. And it's going to be, I think, a challenge for us to figure out how we can do something to upgrade those facilities, leave them on the list as a capital priority, but I think we also are looking at how can we make those places still great places to learn and work without neglecting them. And again, the last thing we deal with, you're all familiar with this, with some of the challenges we've had around some projects. Administrative and regulatory compliance, the reporting that we have to do to the ministry, just as an example, full-day kindergarten, $16 million we've had allocated for capital projects related to full-day kindergarten. Every project over $250,000 has to be approved, and they only want to see the drawings at 85% completion. So the challenge is that you do most of the work, and then they say, no, we don't like that. And it means almost like a complete redo. So just do the math. If you're doing projects that you have to get approvals at $250,000, $16 million worth of spend, a month to get an approval on a project, it can be challenging. And again, we deal with 27 different jurisdictions, and every single one of them has a different interpretation of what a site control agreement is. Trustee Swan and Trustee McRae can probably attest. With respect to operations and maintenance, budget pressure that we have arising from maintenance of tired facilities. So here, the challenge that we have is that our facilities are getting older, and you're starting to see things like tree roots growing through a sanitary line. It blocks the line, and staff are out at midnight digging up a sanitary line. Like these things that you can't predict, they just crop up. It's really pressing on the budget. The way we deal with budget and operations and maintenance is that we are given a pot of money, so around $30 million for operations and maintenance, and then at the start of the year we decide how much of that do we need for staffing and how much of that do we need for all other operations. And inevitably it's a challenging balance. If I put all the staff in that I would want, you don't have enough money to get the work done. If I leave enough money to get all the work done, I don't have enough staff to do the work. So we're always playing that balance. And then finally, the lack of predictability in operations task work is a big challenge. And the examples I used of this tree roots growing through the sanitary line, Molotov cocktail going through the window of the school, these are all examples from the last week. So there's almost no predictability there to how this work arrives. So the strategies, again, matching the strategies to the challenges. The way we've chosen in design and construction to deal with the enormous volume of work was with process discipline. So we have to get control over how projects are developed and how they progress through the entire life cycle so that we can ensure they're appropriately managed throughout the life cycle and that they're coming in on time and on budget within the desired scope. We're not always perfect, but I think we've got a pretty good machine going there for how we monitor what's up to over actually 200 projects now for the end of this year that all kind of occur in 3-4 months. And then the second piece that we're starting to do is, over the course of the last few years, there's been a real emphasis on condition-related projects. So school needs a new roof, school needs new brick veneer. And one of the things that we haven't done is systematically introduced a means where we can look at some of the more discretionary things. So how are we handling, what standards do we have for the security in elementary schools, for example? It's been done on a bit of an ad hoc basis. What are our standards for schools that have concerns about how well their office functions, or schools that have concerns about what their curb appeal looks like, or schools that have concerns about, my lockers are in really shabby shape and I need to do something there. And the approach has been, we address them as best we can when the concern presents itself. But what we're trying to do now is take a little bit more systematic approach for it, set some standards in some of these areas, and start laying out a 5-year plan for how we're going to actually start tackling them in a modest way each year with a portion of our budget. So we're part of the way through that. On operations and maintenance, one of the big challenges we have is, again, this workforce balancing. So what I'm seeing with a more aging custodial workforce particularly is that we're seeing more sick time. So what ends up happening then is you're either calling someone in or you're paying casual staff, which is incremental to your budget. So in order to reduce our reliance on overtime and casual staff, we really need to get at more flexible workforce allocation. So if I've got an excess of staff in one area, I can either move them on a short-term or permanent basis, respecting their personal life and those kinds of things, but move them so that I'm paying straight time to someone where the work is needed at that time. And that was a challenge that we hope to deal with in the last collective bargaining round, but we find ourselves kind of shifting off that strategy a little bit and now looking at how we can regroup and get some flexibility back. We're looking for better discipline in terms of the procurement of goods and services. So some of the challenges that we see in terms of inefficiencies is that we've really done a good job of doing competitive procurement within design and construction. It's almost 100%, whereas a few years ago, you would have the odd, give me a quote and I'll get the work done. Everything now goes through procurement. On the operations side, there's two kinds of challenges. Sometimes when you have an emergency, like the sewer line, you just have to call the person who's available at midnight. So there's not much you can do about going to competitive procurement on that kind of thing. The other thing that we're finding is that we have some situations where you have standing contracts for things like snow plowing. And this is just a recent example, is what tends to happen is snow plowing occurs in January, you get the bill in March. And when you have 3 managers managing 90 sites, it's really hard for them to go back and do a check to make sure that the person who said they plowed the driveway at 4 a.m. on January 30th was actually there at 4 a.m. on January 30th at all 90 schools. And we're starting to introduce some checks and balances into those things to say, you know what, we're going to have some controls so that we can go back and check to make sure that we're spending money where we actually spend it. And then the last piece is one of the challenges that we found in a few years is that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing with respect to ops and maintenance and design and construction. So just a quick example, room would get painted by the operations and maintenance group at the end of the school year. Design and construction would roll in 2 weeks later and rip the room apart and reconfigure it into a computer lab, install new millwork, and repaint it. So what we've started to do now is that these two groups are working much more closely together. So we meet regularly. We put all our anticipated work on the table, and we start looking at ways that we can consolidate that work together. So you're getting more efficient use of the resources, and you're getting more competitive procurement, which typically leads to better pricing. The design and construction budget, this is actually really a summary of the funding sources that you see for capital. So a couple of notes I would just make about this is that capital is a little bit different than other operating budgets in that we have some latitude to carry forward unspent funds from year to year. And what you typically find is that because we do most of our capital construction work in May, June, July, August, it's very rare that I can get the work done and all the money, all the invoices in and spent by the end of August. So what you typically find happen, as an example, with full-day kindergarten, is $16 million in funding. You won't expect to see that all spent in this fiscal year. We have 35 projects with respect to full-day kindergarten. 9 of them are additions. So what you'll see is that funding, that budget drawn down over the course of the next few years as full-day kindergarten rolls out and we bring those additions online. The other thing I would suggest you see in here is a trend. Over the course of the last few years, the ministry was rather pointed in some of its capital allocations, so Green Schools Pilot Initiative, energy efficiency grants, those kinds of things, and they've actually moved away from that model. So we really now have three major pots that we're working with: school renewal, full-day kindergarten capital, and school condition improvement for all intents and purposes. And we have a considerable degree of latitude within those funding pots, as long as the projects that we're proposing meet the definition of a capital expenditure. Operations and maintenance budget. Here I broke this out a little bit more so you can just see a little bit of the breakdown. The challenge that we have here is what you'll notice at the top is that over the course of the last few years, our FTE complement in ops and maintenance has actually been on decline. And that is to sort of match towards declining enrollment, but it's also been a conscious strategy, perhaps unfortunate from some perspectives, but a strategy so that we can buttress our project work budget, because we are finding that almost every year it's a stretch for us to get within the quote-unquote project budget for operations and maintenance. So even though, again, our FTE complement has declined, our staff budget still represents 55% of our overall ops and maintenance budget. And everything else, again, fairly stable in this regard, but it's because we've been pulling that money out of staffing and trying to redirect it towards project work.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Trustees? Trustee McAllister?
Those are two excellent reports, Jeremy. The only problem is I don't know whether to feel very satisfied with your work or very anxious and worried and concerned. Because when I see the challenges that you face, it's scary. How are other boards having this? Do they have the same problems?
Mr. Chair, I would say they do. I mean, the one thing is that I've found in public education, working at a few boards, is we all tend to vastly overestimate how individual we are. And when you talk to your colleagues, we talk to our colleagues, they are all facing the same challenges to one extent or another. I think with respect to IT, we've been very fortunate in the sense that we've probably had more support for technology at the senior table and at the board table than other IT departments have. And so we've been fortunate to be able to do things in some cases that other boards really envy. So, but we're all facing the same pressure. With respect to capital, I think everybody is in the same boat where on the capital side, everyone is looking at each other saying, the ministry, we would like the ministry to acknowledge that it's great to have all these projects, but we need someone to manage the projects, right? And it's starting to outstrip our ability to keep on top of it. In operations, in all fairness to the ministry, they continue to increase the benchmarks modestly, but that's one of the challenges of living in a rural board where you have small schools, is that sometimes it becomes difficult to sustain operations, right? So sorry, that was kind of a roundabout way of answering your question.
And I know, talking from some boards, they just don't know that they have these problems. Trustee McMillan?
Through you, Chair, I certainly echo what Trustee McAllister said. Excellent report. And what it did for me is it gives me a deeper respect for you and your department in the things that you have done and the great achievements that you've made, and also deep respect for the challenges that you face. But I'm very confident in your decision making facing those challenges. So I think you get a report like that, it's hard to find too many questions because you've basically answered a lot of things that we'd want to know. So thanks.
Trustee Karkner?
Just a little aside story about Jeremy. I had him down at one of my Ward 10 meetings this past week to do a presentation on technology in the schools. And after Jeremy left, I heard some parents talking about, gee, we're really fortunate to have this kind of stuff in our schools for the students to work. And also the fact that he said that we're allowing the devices from the children's homes to come into the school, where they were quite impressed by that, but cautioned about what they're capable of doing with those machines while they're there. So Jeremy did a good job of explaining that to the parents, and I think it raised appreciation for the board just a little bit higher. So thank you.
Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. Just going into the IT report for a second, you've highlighted the project work being reduced, not quite by half, but pretty close to half. What, and it was in there, within your projects that you've outlined, is that associated to any of the risks, or you just haven't included some extensions of project work that are listed there?
If I may take a stab at that one, I haven't reflected the budget risk in my assessment of the risk of the projects, because I think we're still in rather early days with respect to the budget itself. And you know, to be frank, every year we have more projects and more demand than we have the money to address. We've been really fortunate in some cases to tap into my colleagues. So out of the Spec Ed group, they've helped us out with using SIA funds to help accelerate our wireless deployment and those kinds of things. And we haven't yet, with respect to next year's projects, we haven't really yet sat down and said, you know, all right, what am I not doing next year? And I think that's one thing that my staff are starting to ruminate on a little bit now, is that, you know, I'm probably not going to be able to fill the hole that's there with those kinds of deals that we make among staff about helping each other out. So then the question becomes, is what do we slow down? And I guess the caution I have with respect to this is that, you know, I use this analogy this morning, is that IT projects tend to be like compounding interest. You make an investment. So people would say to me, you know, Jeremy, why do we have to have all the computers the same in the schools? And it's so I can get Windows 7 on all the computers. And you say, well, why do we need to have Windows 7 on all the computers? It's so that I can now put branch cache in the schools, which optimizes our wide area network. And why do you need to do that? Well, that's so I can deploy software remotely across a wide area network overnight. Why do you need to do that? Well, I want to deploy Link so that I can do video conferencing. And why do you need to do that? Well, that's my only way I can reach, you know, hundreds of people to do Power School training, which is necessary for operations in September, right? So what our concern is a little bit is that, you know, you have to really pick carefully, because if you take out the wrong investment, it's years of compound interest that you lose, right? So.
Thank you. So I'm familiar with the 5 whys. I think we had 7 whys there, but when are you going to know what that impact is? And when will you start having some of those discussions?
We're having some of those discussions right now. I mean, I think probably when you look at the list of projects, the ones that we showed you tonight in the deck related to the presentation are the ones that we recognize that are, you know, the must-dos are the must-dos. Like, I need to run Power School. The ones that come with a mandate from the board or from the Ministry of Education, we consider to be close to a must-do, right? So, well, I consider it to be a must-do. I'm sitting at the board table, so you know. And then beyond that, we start prioritizing. So, you know, the ones you see there are the ones that we're concerned about, and the ones that we're concerned about finding a way to do. And again, like I said, there's when it becomes obvious that we can't do things, then that sort of facilitates a conversation with some of my colleagues, right? So, I would surmise that probably in the July, August timeframe, we'll be sitting down as we close out projects in this fiscal year, starting to say which are the ones we're opening next fiscal year.
Just now moving into the facility side of things, a couple of questions there. On the design and construction of the project type work, do you have tracking mechanism to be able to track the project cost from the specific project that you're working on and report it back?
So we have about 200 projects on the go and at various stages. And so a few years ago, we built a, well, let's step back. We right now have no real mechanism or business process for tracking staff time against a project. So in some cases, like the Power School implementation, we do timesheets with staff because we're so careful about making sure our weekly objectives on that project are met. On other projects, we don't track staff time, but we do track expenditures out of the organization for you know, invoices and those kinds of things. So within the facilities department, we built what we call a project registry workflow, which allows us to farm out, assign a project manager to a project, and then they have a tool, electronic tool, that allows them to walk through the development of the project. It gets sent to the senior manager for approvals at fixed periods of time, and then the theory is that we can roll up from our financial system how many invoices have gone through against that project. So the goal is that the project manager at any time should be able to say, I've got $1 million to spend and $750,000 across the general ledger, and I can move on. We have not been able to make that automatic connection yet, so I have a staff member who does that manually for the project managers.
Just to follow up on still on the facility side of things, you kind of alluded to this a little bit when you talked about some of the work that you do, but there's a board in the province that came under great scrutiny for the work that was being done either internally or through contractors, and the exorbitant costs associated to putting a pencil sharpener in a classroom. Do you have mechanisms in place to control, and I think you talked specifically about one that you think is a risk issue, but you have other mechanisms in place to ensure that the cost associated with the task or with the job is relative?
Well, I think I know what you're talking about. So, without mentioning any names, we have quite a different relationship with trades than perhaps larger boards do. So we really have no trades on staff. We have a few, but that will do millwork and those kinds of things. So the way the chief control by which we ensure value is competitive procurement. So I don't have kind of an arm's length deal with a trades organization on staff where I'm buying services from them. Typically, the way we work is if there's a body of work that's big enough to be called what we would call a project, we will tender for it. If there's a body of work that's smaller, we typically go through the purchasing department and pre-qualify vendors like electricians or painters and those kinds of things, and then we buy services off those. And there's a monitoring process to ensure that they're compliant with what our requirements are. But the chief mechanism by which we insulate ourselves from that is just by pretty much everything we do is outsourced.
Director?
And Jeremy's being complimentary too, but we do not have some of the difficulty with, let's say it's a pencil sharpener. We actually would probably have custodial staff within the school purchase 15 or so pencil sharpeners. They would do it themselves. They would not make a work order out for that. That would be work that would be considered part of the woman or the man who's on the site who would be doing the job. I do understand that the board that had the problem with that would have to make out a work order, and that was used as some way to check work. In fact, we know that we drove the price up for the pencil sharpener to $498. So we would actually probably through the office administrator and the principal purchase up-to-date pencil sharpener and probably have 10 of them on staff kept in a small inventory and change them at the appropriate rate for probably around whatever it takes to do that, and $14 for a pencil sharpener.
Just one final
Yep,
question.
go ahead, Trustee McDonald.
Just one final question. You talked about the funding that we receive associated to the projects that we have, and you're able to move forward. In the funding that we receive, whether it's through FDK capital or school renewal or those types of things, large project associated to it, and the challenges you had in other areas where you've got so much money to be able to do the work and not enough people to do it, so those challenges are we able to incorporate the cost associated to your staff time to tie back into what that project would be? Because aside from the actual building of it, you have management associated to ensuring that we're on track. Can we tie those costs back in and incorporate the costs in the overall project?
Mr. Chair, yes, that is possible. Actually, we're just actually in the process of deploying a product called Project Enterprise Server, which for larger projects allows you to track staff time against a project. The chief challenge that you have with these things is when you're already lean on staff time and you got huge projects. My staff already grumble a little bit about this project management stuff, so we try and make it light for them so that we're getting the appropriate level of sort of due diligence from a management perspective. So the real question is how much management overhead do I want to introduce against these projects, and what is the bang for the buck? But I think if I understand your point, you're saying how can I actually illustrate or build a case for the actual staff costs that we incur against a project in addition to what we pay for the tender price, for example. And so my suggestion is that we could probably take a couple of projects, and probably bigger ones would be suitable, like a school construction or something, and use this kind of timesheet functionality so we could illustrate that, right? Because I mean that is getting to the point where my staff are remarking that they said, it's not the management, it's that they're concerned about there's so much volume of projects and there's deadlines and all these kinds of things, and they you know, they're starting to worry that it's like they don't have the time to devote all the kind of attention to it, right, that they would. So I think it's possible, and I think we have a tool that's actually just been installed this week that we could use.
Thank you.
Trustee McPherson?
Just kind of looking in the crystal ball a wee bit. We've got roughly 12,000 computers in the board, and I realize that's a substantial capital investment. I also acknowledge the fact that a computer has a functional lifespan. Do you see any future impact of replacing 12,000 computers?
Mr. Chair, couple impacts. So in the course of the last 8 years, we've been through what we call these cyclical upgrade or CUP cycles, where every 3 years we replace a third of the computers. So basically what we're looking at is in the neighborhood of a 9-year lifespan for a desktop computer, which is in 1994 would have been horrendous, but today it's quite acceptable. You get a good long life out of them. So we could continue on indefinitely, I think, but the challenge is we would be continuing on into irrelevance. So I think the challenge for us in the coming few years is going to be to say, how do I actually acknowledge this heterogeneous environment that we're living with? It doesn't make sense to be building computer labs anymore when kids are using iPods and iPads and like tablet devices like I'm using and those kinds of things. So the challenge will be for us to figure out what's the right mix of device so we remain relevant, cutting edge, and I think more importantly than being cutting edge is that we need to have a match of the technology to what's going on in the classroom. So the big issue that keeps me awake, I think, is not so much how you get those replaced, because we've demonstrated that we've replaced every single PC in the system once and added 20% at the same time. The real challenge is going to be is what's the right mix of devices and what is our role as a board in terms of equipping students versus kids wanting to choose and bring their own devices in. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hobbs. Appreciate the report. Yeah, so now next up is Mr. Coombs. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm presenting two reports tonight. Both are under Teaching for Learning. The first is school operations as it applies to instruction. The second is alternative and continuing education. And I actually think it's very appropriate that I'm giving both at the same time because they do lend, there are commonalities, and certainly you'll see some common themes throughout both. When I was preparing the first presentation on school operations, I was commenting to a colleague that I go, you know, you would think $160 million is a lot of money. And he stopped me right away and said, that's because $160 million is a lot of money. What I meant to say was that 90% of that money automatically goes to salaries and benefits, predominantly our elementary and secondary teaching staff. This is funded predominantly through GSNs with some EPOs, but much of it attached to enrollment. So as you can probably imagine, when I'm talking about budget and I'm talking about instruction, enrollment is going to have a significant impact upon that. Now, I'm not going to belabor the enrollment issue. You've had many excellent presentations, especially from Mr. Dawes, sitting behind me. But I think it is important to note that there is continual declining enrollment in our board, both at the elementary and secondary level. Less at the secondary level. That enrollment decline has pretty much gone through like a wave through our system at elementary. We've stabilized, although we are going to be down some students next year. But secondary is still fairly significant. And that is going to have a real impact because, as you know, we are a system of small schools. We are especially a system of small high schools. And that has a significant impact upon program in our schools. The other day we were saying, you know, we do have some small schools. I was talking with a colleague and I said, actually, if you look at it, we're all small schools. All our high schools are small. If you consider from a provincial standpoint, a provincial average standpoint. This impacts obviously upon our funding. We could go two ahead. Thank you, right there. So you'll see, going back 3 years, that our enrollment in elementary, which has gone in decline, impacts upon our bottom line. We're projecting being down about $1.8 million approximately. And in secondary, we anticipate being down about $2.5 million on the instructional line based upon our enrollment decline. Now, this is, obviously we've known this is coming and we've been planning for it and trying to mitigate the risks that are inherent in this. But I do want to bring a few things, and I'll try to be as concise as possible, but there are some important things of what this is going to mean at the school level. Because in the classroom, that is where we add value, as we all know. I'd like to talk, first of all, regarding some of our areas of challenge. So I talked about small high schools. We recently had a contract imposed upon us, and still in effect is a workload agreement which includes hard caps in secondary schools. That should matter. I'm certainly you've heard some questions about this. It means that a automotive class cannot have more than 18 students in it. It means that an applied math class cannot have more than 23 students. It means that a university English cannot have more than 28. And unfortunately, as we know, kids don't come in nice little baskets of 18, 23, and 28. So what happens when you have the 29th and 30th student that wants to take calculus? What do you do with the student who really wants to take automotive, but they just happen to be a little later signing up for it? So this is particularly challenging to our small schools. One of the things that we are obviously we've been unable to address that cap issue, but one of the strategies which we're applying is e-learning, and I do want to take some time to emphasize our e-learning strategy. In the past years, we've run day school e-learning about 21 courses a year, or 21 sections as we call them. That's over 2 semesters. We've increased that for 2013-14 to 36 day school online sections. We've also been more collaborative and strategic with how we select those courses. So we've gone to our guidance counselors and we've gone to our principals in December and November and said, what courses are you really worried about offering next year? Because what a lot of schools do is they'll offer one every second year. They made physics, if you don't get physics the right year, you're going to have to wait to the next year to get it. Or calculus, or writer's craft, or some popular courses. So we've strategically selected those e-learning courses. We've also identified those teachers which particularly enjoy the online learning environment. And I want to talk about online learning just for a second. Online learning is not simply, I think there is a bit of a bad rap out there that if you do e-learning, you are in front of a, just simply doing, mindlessly doing assignments off a computer screen all day long. Actually, the new Desire to Learn platform, software platform, which we're using, is incredibly engaging for the right teacher who knows how to use it properly. So we've identified those teachers that really are excited about offering those opportunities. So kids get to engage in actual social dialogue and learning conversations with kids around the board. So you might have 6 kids in Charlan who are taking calculus. There might be 4 kids in Rockville. There might be 2 kids in Gananoque. They can combine online, they can take the course, and they can engage in the learning opportunities socially with a teacher that gives them real-time feedback. It's a really important distinction. When I talk about continuing education, we go back to that whole idea of just marking books out of being a marker and only giving feedback when you complete a lesson. One of the things we're doing is in day school online is that kids will get real-time feedback as they proceed through the curriculum. So that's one strategy which we're using to assist our small schools in offering fulsome programming. I think also one of the concerns which I think you'll be hearing a lot if you haven't yet is the 34 credit threshold, and I just want to highlight that briefly. The 34 credit threshold comes into effect this September. So students may no longer, well, they can come back, and indeed we're obliged to take them back into our board if they want to take 35, 36, or 37 credits. But the problem is they will not be funded at the day school register rate. They'll be funded at the continuing education rate, which, as I'm sure Mr. Gales beside me can attest to, is significantly lower. So that's going to have an impact upon our bottom line next year. Now, how much of an impact? Well, I've been talking to principals, and they've been actually engaging in their students that are coming back for a 5th year and asking them what they intend to take and how many credits they need to take. Approximately about 5% of our graduates every year have 35 or more credits. But there are exemptions, and this is really important to understand. So if the student has an IEP and they're taking a 35th or 36th credit, that is still funded at the day school rate. If they are from out of province or out of country and they're having to make up credits, they're funded at the day school rate. If their English is a second language and they're new to the country, again, funded at the day school rate. So, or if they're just cramming a whole bunch of subjects in, and we do have them out there that are taking extra courses in the summer over 4 years, funded at the day school rate. So that will certainly have an impact, and we are working with our principals to ascertain what that impact will be. As of right now, the majority of principals are saying, I've got a handful, but boy, I don't have that many. So we hope to, in the next couple of weeks, have some solid numbers of what that's going to look like. We'll be able to apply that to our funding formula for next year. Our geography is certainly a limiting factor for us, but it can also be a strength. Our smaller schools are engaging. Our smaller schools are great for student retention because the staff knows all the kids. And there is much more a sense of we are in this together and we must work together. There was a time when principals really saw themselves as resource gatherers for their school. And really, whatever happened down the road, well, I'm just going to try to get mine here in my little community, and I'm going to make my community happy. There's much more collaboration between principals to engage in conversations about how can we share a program. Not just, it doesn't have to be a TIS kid or a BCI kid or an Athens kid. It's a UCDSB kid. How can we create campuses of learning for these kids? And we will be using the Desire to Learn platform more and more in the future to allow that to happen. I would also like to point out that our Native Studies and language course offerings continue to grow. This past year, we've had more than 1,000 students do a Native Studies course or a Native language course in Upper Canada. We anticipate that being over 1,200 next year. One important point to note about that is a revenue benefit for this board. Up until 2016, the ministry returns money or creates revenue per non-Native student who takes a Native Studies course. And we are a provincial leader. We have over 60 courses currently offered. We anticipate being 65 or 66 next year, with every single school in Upper Canada offering at least 1 or 2 Native Studies courses. So that's a really good win for us. One of the impacts that we see in declining enrollment at the secondary level is as staffing decreases, it means teachers are placed into some subjects which perhaps they haven't taught for an awful long time. So they may have math on their ticket, which we say is their certificate, but they haven't taught it in 15 or 20 years. Well, now, as the staff declines and that seniority line creeps up, they may now be placed into courses that they have to teach and where they don't have the same comfort level. And that certainly is something which we're watching very carefully to ensure that those teachers that are in those courses are up to date in their curriculum and are engaging in our collaborative inquiry process to ensure that our pedagogy is up to speed. But that is certainly something which principals are aware of and are working very hard to mitigate. Again, I really see e-learning as being a real area for growth in the future, and I really anticipate that we're going to do some exciting things in the coming few years. So, if I may, Chair, can I skip on to continuing education and go forward on that? Alternative and continuing education. So I'm really talking about, obviously, TR Leger. I'd like to point out that TR Leger is our largest school, and indeed, it's the largest school in Eastern Ontario. In the past 5 or 6 years, since 2006, we've graduated over 1,500 students, 70% of those adults. It has a tremendous impact upon communities, especially with the economic downturn. and the retraining that TR Leger offers. We see a lot of adults who see their children graduating from TR Leger and become inspired and graduate themselves. And I was at TR Leger in Smith Falls just this afternoon, where there was that example where I met a girl whose mother went back to school because she couldn't stand it. She said, I can't keep telling my daughter to go to class when I don't have a high school diploma myself. And there's all kinds of great news stories about TR Leger. TR Leger is actually, though, a very comprehensive school. It's one school, but it's spread out over 29 campuses. One more? Thank you. So again, the issue with this, of course, is that the administration, energy, focus of staff is spread out over a large territory. Okay. One more? Thank you. So over the past few years, these are some of the programs that TR Leger has added. The ABLE, Transitions and Foundations programs, our Safe Schools SDP program, or Successful Destinations program, Alternative Behavior Learning Environment, or ABLE, is connected to TR Leger. And all of these things create a great deal of complexity for our administration staff. One more. We spend just under $12 million this past year on continuing education. Again, the bulk of that going to teacher salaries and benefits, as well as administration costs. But we have some different revenue sources which you may not be aware of. And indeed, for example, we have programs with partnership with the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration and the Ministry of Colleges of Training and Universities of about $1.8 million. And these run English as a second language programs, adult basic literacy programs, as well as language instruction for newcomers to Canada. So it's actually quite exciting what TR Leger does with those populations. One of the things which threw us a bit of a curve in September was the ministry changed their registration attendance policy. So it used to be that you would have to be removed from the register if you missed 15 consecutive days. Well, they changed that to be 15 consecutive periods. Now, in a day school, that doesn't have as great an impact. In an alternative school, which is there because they struggle, a lot of kids struggle with school attendance, they're having difficulty at home, or they have to work, or they have to look after a younger sister or a child. That actually resulted in a loss of about 40 FTE, or full-time enrollment students, in our first capture date. So what we're intending to do, and we've already done this semester, is run a tumbling timetable so that kids could still get those 3 periods or those 225 minutes and still be full-time students. What we had was a whole bunch of students who went from part-time to full-time because of this registration issue. So we've made some changes to how we run our schools and the timetable, and we would expect that we're not going to lose those students next year. One of the things that is a bit of a concern for us is, is actually our success. We've had a lot of success with our Transitions and Foundations program, and those programs specifically are for those hard-to-serve kids that are really disengaged in school for whatever reason. So we've actually increased our Transitions Foundations programming so that we are now in 7 sites around Eastern Ontario. The kind of conversation we've been having, though, is that really a sign of health for an organization when we have to set up alternative sites because perhaps our day schools are not engaging for our kids? And don't get me wrong, I think that these programs serve critical needs in our communities, and we're not talking about doing away with them. But we are wondering whether this is a sign of perhaps that our day schools, especially our secondary schools, can do a better job in engaging our kids at the classroom level. Okay. A couple of good news things that we're quite happy about. We are working much closer. The day schools and TR Leger are working much closer together. There's certainly a better understanding of the services that TR Leger offers as a complement to our secondary education day school, and certainly there is greater student ownership. I think a problem that we've had in the past is when a child leaves day school and they say that they're going to enroll in TR Leger, that's a big crack that sometimes kids fall into. If they don't show up for TR Leger, who's checking up on them? Who owns that kid? And our belief strongly is that we own that child, the day school owns that child, and should be following up with TR Leger. That's a cultural shift. It means that TR Leger has to work much more closely, and under our new leadership with Jeff Tarasic, and certainly Frank was heading in that direction, Principal Hummel, we are much more closely aligned with sharing the ownership of these children, some of these children with some of the most profound social emotional needs in our system. So I would just like to say that TR Leger is certainly a success story for us as a board. If you go to any of the graduations in June, certainly they're heartwarming. It's a great news story, and will continue to be so. At this time, I'll entertain any questions on either presentation.
Trustee McPherson?
I just need an explanation, and this was presented to us last night at SEAC, and I just can't quite understand what it means. So it's just a clarification. It's based on the 34 credits. It says the students who were enrolled in their first 4 consecutive years of secondary school are exempt. What does that mean?
That means students who take Reach Ahead programs in the summertime. So, for example, they might take summer co-op and get a couple of extra credits, or they might take a Reach Ahead day school online courses. If they get 35 or 36 credits, but they get it within their first 4 years since starting grade 9, they are still funded at the day school rate.
So if you get somebody that's really on the fast track,
absolutely,
and they do it within 4 years, they can still add to that. Okay.
Doesn't penalize them. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Thank you.
Trustee McAllister?
I have a question through your chair to Superintendent Coombs with regard to the reorganization of TR Leger. I'm wondering if you could expand upon that. I know you've mentioned the issue of student ownership and greater cooperation between the day school and the TR Leger schools. Does that mean that there's going to be a reduction in the number of TR Leger sites? Is that what we're aiming towards?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, actually, and one thing I neglected to mention that's in your package is the end of our partnership with the Prescott-Russell Tri-Board partnership. We actually are adding 3 sites to replace that partnership, Castleman, Hawkesbury, and Rockland, thank you very much. We are anticipating that we're actually going to save about $500,000, but maintain, if not enhance, the services that we provide students. The partnership was not an efficient one for our board. So when we talk reorganization, we're not talking about downsizing areas, although we are looking at being able to consolidate Jeff Tarasic is looking at this with his staff. How can we consolidate our sites to best serve? Because in some of our sites, we have a very limited number of staff, but we're not looking at reducing service across the board. There are some sites that we are looking to consolidate just so that we can provide better service in that site. But we need to be everywhere. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have 29 sites. We're a big board, one school, but we need to be geographically located in convenient locations throughout our board, and we're going to maintain that level of service.
Thank you for that answer. I'm just a little bit concerned because it would appear that we're trying to retain in the day school more and more, or at least attract and maintain these students in the day school, but we must not lose focus that the very reason that they don't succeed in the day school is because they don't succeed in that kind of more structured environment. So I hope we are going to continue to respect that, are we?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is very good research on this, and you're quite right, Trustee McAllister, that there are students that will not be served. There are some students that need a flexible environment, a non-judgmental environment that is going to hold them to some standards, and that is going to give them the opportunity to have that flexibility in their program. I think our concern is that sometimes the easy fix is to remove the student from the day school to an alternate location. While that, we want to maintain service for those students where that is necessary, we also want to make sure that our day schools are engaging and welcoming for all students. There has been I would say that this has been part of our history and our culture, that secondary students will say, you're not doing too well here, you should go to TR Leger and get a couple of credits. So the student goes to TR Leger and perhaps they don't show up, or perhaps they don't do too well, or perhaps they just don't complete for whatever reason, and then the day school says, well, I said you could only come back if you got a couple of credits, and you don't have a couple of credits. That is much less. That's we're working very hard to remove that culture. But on the other hand, then there's the other instance where they go to TR Leger and they're actually successful and get 2 or 3 credits, and they come back and say, I got 2 or 3 credits, and the day school says, well, you're very successful at TR Leger, you should stay there. I guess I just want to make sure, and I think as a system we want to make sure that our day schools are open and welcoming for all students. But that certainly doesn't mean that we are not going to need that special place where, which is welcoming for kids that just don't fit the mold at this time for day school placement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Trustee McDonald?
Thank you. It's something I think we're all familiar with, but I want to make sure that I ask the question and have a good understanding. We use declining enrollment quite easily and quite freely within the context of education. But what does declining enrollment mean? Does it mean that we're losing kids because of the services that we provide, or is it because there are fewer kids?
Okay.
Director?
Thank you, David. That's a great question. I know the person behind you can perhaps give the most accurate answer in Ontario, Phil Dawes. The fact is that and David, thank you for that, because for a long time we have sort of thought that declining enrollment meant that we were losing our capture rate, or we had kids going across to the French Catholic or the Catholic Board or the French Public Board. In fact, the declining enrollment has to do with the fact is that in Eastern Ontario we were in a decline, but more importantly, a part of the population of Ontario, of Alberta, of every major area in North America, we're not replacing ourselves. Our sons and daughters are not replacing themselves at the rate that we were replaced. And so what a family now, I look here anecdotally, myself, 34-year-old son, 28-year-old daughter today, and I'm not a grandfather yet, but at this particular time, my mom and dad had 10 grandparents, 10 grandchildren. I think we're looking at the fact that that is not unusual, that we're not replacing ourselves at the same rate. And so what I'd like to do is, David, thank you for the question, because we're working very, very hard. As you know, our capture rate for 9 consecutive years has gone up, yet we continue to suffer under declining enrollment as you go through. However, our First Nations is at a rate that's replacing itself very, very well. In fact, it's in many places it's the area of population growth, which is good for us in many ways because of our 7-year agreement with our Akwesasne board. Now, I would invite David to answer the question, and Phil perhaps can be more articulate as to what declining enrollment in Eastern Ontario really means. Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, yes, declining enrollment is certainly expected. We're actually this declining enrollment is eerily similar to the projections that Mr. Dawes and his department have been making over the past few years. So there are fewer students for everybody out there. We are all getting smaller. There are some areas and blips where that is where we've bucked that trend, and certainly there are some schools like North Grenville like Smith Falls, where we have actually been gaining in relation to our coterminous board. But Mr. Dawes, I will bow to your expertise in this area, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David, and very briefly, we've reported on this before, but it is important to note that this is a trend that's happening right across Ontario, right across Canada. David mentioned birth rates. We commonly refer to that as fertility rate. That is the average number of children that women of childbearing age are having, and it's true that that has seen a decline over the past few years. But what's really driving enrollment decline is the impact of the echo boom. We had a huge population boom, which was the baby boom, and then the children of the baby boom were the echo boom. And those children have now moved through our elementary panel, and that's why we're seeing the enrollment decline at the secondary panel. So the benchmark that we were familiar for using, we went through a number of years where enrollments were increasing and then kind of stabilized at a point. Then those kindergarten entry level numbers started to decrease. So picture, if you will, incrementally, year after year after year, we had fewer students in the grade before the grade coming through. And so now at our elementary panel, we have, for all intents and purposes, leveled out. We've seen a little bit of an enrollment decline on the elementary panel this year. We're projecting a slight decline on the system for next year of about 80 students. But that enrollment decline that fed through the elementary panel and now into the secondary panel continues. And we have about 5 more years of rather significant enrollment decline at the secondary level to expect, to the point that we'll see just slightly over 9,100 students by year 5 from now. And right now we're at about 10,000 students.
Trustee McDonald?
Thank you, that's great. I think it's important to understand what, when we report the numbers, it's not because of anything to do with capture rate at that point. Getting into the TR Léger aspect for a second, if I may. When we look at the programs that are being offered within TR Léger and the work that's being done to look at it, I mean, the blended environment is a great environment. I think it's something that kind of leads into some research that I've seen as well around the flipped classroom. There's some benefits associated to it. The approach that we have, and I want to be careful how I ask this, not to get into a labor relations issue, but are we confined to how we can offer programming based on contractual issues? I got into labor relations, but
thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, certainly, as I mentioned, the hard cap right now of our workload portion of our agreement does confine us somewhat. Also, we would like to offer more blended learning environments where you would have a teacher perhaps teaching a class in Charlan and synchronously another class perhaps in 2 or 3 other schools could link into that. Currently we have language in our collective agreement that prevents that. So yes, I mean, certainly there are contractual issues that do hamper us. And again, if you have a school like RO with 150 kids and you have hard caps and those kids come in rather awkward numbers, it means you can't be very efficient in how you run your program. So principals right now, as they build their timetables, are making some very hard decisions about what they can afford to run and what they can't afford to run.
do you know if there are other boards that have been successful in trying to, whittle away, I guess, or achieve some advancements and to be able to offer some program delivery that is beneficial for, I mean, we have a diverse section of students, right? So we have to look at some diverse offerings. So has anyone been successful?
Perhaps I could ask, if that's okay, Chair, perhaps Superintendent Patterson would have a better handle on that.
Go ahead, Superintendent Patterson.
Through you, Chair, I don't have the exact information to hand tonight. However, I can tell you that hard caps are certainly evident in all collective agreements across the province in the public school boards. That being said, in some boards, there are strategies that have been employed via the collective agreement, or perhaps outside the collective agreement, but through a memorandum of understanding that provides more flexibility than we would see locally here with our OSSTS bargaining unit. So there are some strategies. One, for example, is acknowledging that there is a hard cap, but there's flexibility of a few students beyond that. And if you go beyond that number, then the teacher is compensated accordingly, you know, by virtue of a formula that exists. That's just one strategy, but there are others as well.
One final.
Okay, final.
Just the final. So Superintendent Coombs, a good report. The narrative was good information. The slides are great. Comment, I guess, is from the pie graphs that we have in front of us. We get an indication of how slim or how big certain portions are. I think it would help me anyway. I'm not sure about my colleagues. What's the associated figure to that sliver of the pie? If we could see that at some point.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Trustee Swan?
You had mentioned that because of declining enrollment, teachers may be forced to teach subjects they hadn't taught in years. And I'm just wondering, where in this budget, what are we doing to support these teachers? It says they might be outside their qualifications now. What kind of money, percentage of this are we spending on that? Is that under the other part of the pie, or?
Yes, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. One of the our expectation is that teachers are no longer independent contractors, as sometimes has been the case. Our expectation is that teachers do work collaboratively within their schools. However, through our hubs and nodes, our teachers engage other teachers throughout the system or throughout their families of schools to address curriculum issues, and it's working actually with principals and with teachers from other schools within a family that enable them to become more familiar with curriculum. One of the things that I've been very blessed as part of my role as a superintendent is I get to go in and I get to experience the grade 3 curriculum, the grade 5 curriculum, the grade 12 physics curriculum. I'm not a physics teacher, but I do have the opportunity to engage in that kind of professional practice embedded within the classroom. It is a concern that those teachers that are placed in subjects that are outside their comfort areas have to get up to speed very quickly. So certainly that's a portion of what principals would do as part of their school success plan to get teachers working, visiting other classrooms, visiting other schools, mentoring up with other teachers from other schools, and there is a portion of the school budgets which are allocated to that, yes.
Director?
The Trustee Swan, the other piece that's critical is that the principal has to be looking out over the horizon at the potential situations they're going to find themselves in. So they're tapping people, staff on the shoulders 2 and 3 years in advance of such a call, saying, I see the number, because Phil gives the numbers out, projects them for 3 or 4 years. So a principal in their school will know that we're going to be down 100 kids by this time, and they look around at who's going to retire and who's going to be around. They'll take a look at their staff complement of skill sets and talent, and they'll go to individual teachers, say it's time to not only to protect yourself here, is that you better upgrade this one, or you better take this course. One of the things that the ministry is doing now through some of its courses is giving refreshers. And what the very effective principals are doing, they're looking down, and Ian is encouraging that collaboration to say, don't just look at this year, look at what's happening in the next 5 years in your school to make sure that you're not stuck without a physics teacher. That if you're going to go there and start to organize that, and you're looking at your hiring, and that's something that I know has begun as a part of the family schools, the discussions, and I think the principals are really starting to understand you can't staff for 1 year, you're staffing for 3 to 5 years. Fair? Ian?
Superintendent Coombs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to tag on to that, we have run sessions with our principals where we've given them their staff list and their projected enrollment out to 2016. And we've asked them to say, okay, here's what your numbers are going to be. Draw your line, your seniority line, and then anticipate what that's going to mean to your program staff. So as Director Thomas said, that our principals are anticipating that going forward.
Trustee Garrow?
Through you, Chair. Superintendent Coombs, one of the things that we've been working on with the Chiefs of Ontario, I recognize the growth in the Native Studies program, and I know that it comes with a bit of more resources, let's put it that way, going from 1,000 to 1,200. But one of the initiatives that we're trying to push forward is having all secondary students take the course, mandatory course. So that would provide some resources, additional resources. But in doing so, we also recognize the fact that there has to be more federal funding. And when I go where they're looking at new policies, education policies and what have you, that there has to be much more of an openness, I guess, in agreements between the federal and provincial government to say that these are additional dollars that are required. The other side of it is that, well, the other part that I want to talk about was also early childhood education. You're going to full day kindergarten and that sort of thing. And I mean, it's been proven, but again, additional dollars have to be provided there as well. And I think even on the capital side, with Jeremy's talked about it, you know, and, previously. So, with being our population is growing, you know, we have to sort of look at that and sort of project where, you know, how that could be used. And through I was looking at the self-identification, because the numbers are coming out that there are thousands of self-identified, and that also has to be a realization that that again, resources are required. Good report.
Any other comments? Okay, thanks very much, Superintendent Coombs. Next up, Susan, Superintendent Edwards.
Yes, thank you, Chair Petersma. And I have one presentation, unlike my colleagues here who have had two presentations. I have one presentation tonight, and I'm pleased to have the presentation.
So you're looking for more work? Is that what you're saying?
Whoa. So I'm pleased to present the Student Engagement Special Education budget presentation. And the background for this is actually what's in your board docs in the library there. And the backup for that was a special education plan, because the special education budget is driven from the special education plan. And the special education plan that is in your board docs library right now is just a draft for 2013-2014. Our SEAC members last night received the plan along with a number of changes. We had a first look at it. We'll come back in June for a more fulsome discussion on that, and then bring that to the board for approval. So the last night we presented this presentation, the budget presentation, to our SEAC group, because as I said, the special education plan budget has to support the special education plan. And our approach to student support, at the very heart of it, and our core beliefs at the very, very heart of it, is that special education is an integral part of the programming. It's not separate. And at the very heart of that is that students are provided the programming within the classroom setting, not separate from the classroom setting. Maybe small at times when we need small group groupings, that's fine, but it's always within the context of the classroom setting. The programs for exceptional students are based on the strengths. We focus on the strengths. We do on our IEPs also focus on the needs and bridging that, but we work from the students' strengths and to work at stretching the learning from there. We worked through the IPRC process and the IEPs to develop the appropriate assessments and the appropriate identifications and the programming. Our approach to the student support and our exceptional students is that it is a shared responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility in terms of wrapping care and support and resourcefulness around all of our students. So that is our approach to providing our student support. So I'd like to highlight a few of our key achievements. First of all, along with our collaborative inquiries, we've approached an inquiry approach for taking a look at our individual education plans. Similar approach to our hubs and nodes, and where we go into the families of schools, we bring a selection of IEPs, principals, learning resource teachers, teachers from schools, and learning resource coaches, along with some system staff, have a day of conversation inquiry in terms of, does the IEP meet the students' needs? Is it stretching them? What are the gaps? What are the learning? Is it the same IEP that was cut and paste for the strengths and the next steps? Those conversations. Jeremy has talked about partnerships with our SIA equipment. That's one of the other highlights that we've really focused on this year, is that we have reviewed our SIA technology with a goal of long-term sustainability. Each year we step back within the funding, and so we really have worked very, very hard. IT has always been a great partner, but that absolute partnership and working very, very closely together, tightly together, and in terms of the improved implementation with regards to the software supports, and also with regards to the devices that are necessary. We really much take the focus here that learning is the driver and technology is the tool, so that for our students that require the CA equipment, by bringing them and working with them to come to their student success team meeting, and ensuring that the device is working for them. And a good example of this is just from the other day. A student was at their own student success team in a circle around with school staff as well as system staff, and as this conversation was going along, the student asked if the programs that she needed could be put on an iPad. She had a laptop computer. And drilling deeper in that, in terms of trying to understand the why, what she explained was because she was sitting in a wheelchair, because she had a wheelchair, her backpack was on the back, and on iPad it's very light and easy to bring forward. She was not able to take out her laptop on her own without support to bring it forward. So again, really working with our staff to understand the technology and to work in the training and to support for the effective use of the technology. The other area that we've worked on is with STAO and our special needs transportation, in terms of really taking a look at what students do need, special needs transportation, and what students require some supports of different types on the regular transportation system, to try to reduce the number of students requiring smaller vans for special transportation. Another one of our key achievements is last year in our new Spec Ed plan, we put a new gifted criteria out for identifying gifted students, and this year we're in the monitoring of those results on an ongoing basis. We have increased the number of students supported in the regular classroom and in school environments over the course of the last 2 years. And we work very hard with our community partners across the Upper Canada District School Board, especially with our mental health partners and agencies across, in terms of making the word collaboration and integrated services a real verb, and bringing and wrapping, working together to bring systems that will reach our families and our students. Some examples of that are our ABA work, our work with students and with autism, with CHEO, our partnerships with CHEO and Pathways, our suicide protocol, which is in the draft form right now, and our violent threat at risk assessment. The ongoing work that with our partners. The next slide is the budget slide, and again, it's with Rick's smaller font up there. A couple of things you might note is that the difference between last year's budget and this year's budget is about $1 million. Last year being about 47 million, and this year's about 46 million. And really, if you take a look at it, what we are stepping back in, we're not receiving any new funding for SIA, and so we're down about $1 million within our SIA, the money we've put aside for our planning, purposeful planning for our SIA, and we have that on an ongoing basis, and we have a plan for that. The other, the greatest risk to the board with regards to our funding are any changes in the funding formula to special education. Our high needs amount, we are at the highest category for percentages from the ministry within our high needs amount, and receive that. So any changes to the funding formula may cause us that to be a risk. With regards to the next slide, which is the expenditures, 98, similar to Superintendent Coombs, about 98% of our budget is spent on staffing. Mainly the classroom teacher staffing for our learning resource teachers, our learning resource coaches in our elementary school, our educational assistants, and our professional and paraprofessional system staff. If you take a look at the school-based staffing, we work hard with our principals through our student needs assessment to get the right supports, the supports that they need for the students in their schools. So as you can see, as we just had the previous discussion with the ADE stepping down over the years, our number of teachers has decreased slightly within our schools to reflect our ADE. Our EAs this year will be staffing at 320 EAs. Over the course of the last 3 years, we've staffed between 312. Last year we staffed at 313 EAs at this time, and this year we're staffing at 320 EAs. As you well know, we staff now, and it only goes up from there, given any emerging needs that come in through the school year, or new students that come in that may need that support. The other bar that you see that has gone up in terms of percentage, working with our principals, there has been a greater need and request because of their student populations for child and youth workers. So again, our student needs assessment, which has been shared across the province and used by other school boards and adopted that, the approach is to keep our support at the school-based staffing, but we have enough so that we can be flexible throughout the year to meet new needs, and to support principals and support the child's needs when it needs it in an inclusive environment. And in an inclusive student-based learning environment, the child doesn't need all the support from one individual all the time in most circumstances. Take a look at the next one. This is a pie chart that shows the operating context, and the piece of the pie on the right represents the classroom teachers, and the green represents the educational assistants, to show the largest piece within the operating expenditures. And the other two pieces, the orange piece there represents our system staff, and the purple and blue slice represent our assessments and our computers, our SIA budget. And the two smaller slices represent one for professional learning, and the other slice for our coordinators and principals of special education. Some of our key strategies going forward is that we will continue to focus on an inquiry approach to build capacity and supports with our schools and with our community partners. Next year we currently have a mental health and addiction nurse hired, and we'll be looking at the full partnership with our schools and professional development with that. We have 3 charters which we'll be supporting through our special education plan: the gifted charter, the adolescent charter, and the telepractice charter. The now what, we talked about with the gifted criteria, so we're identifying more gifted students. Focus is really on the now what, now that we've identified what does this look like for our gifted students and the programming within the classroom. And so additional work is being undertaken in that area with our principals and with our schools, and the focus is really on the awareness of the different profiles for gifted. You have gifted, for example, you have gifted LD or gifted ADHD. So really helping our awareness with our staff and building the capacity and the professional learning of what a gifted student and their learning profile. We've also really taking a look at, Superintendent Coons mentioned the e-learning possibilities, really taking again a look at the family of schools approach to expanded learning for the gifted programming. The other thing that we're looking at for one of the key strategies is joint ministry protocol, which comes into place for next year for the transition from from high school to either the world of work or life experiences or community experiences for some of our students. And this protocol is a collaborative protocol with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Child and Youth Services, and the Ministry of Community Services. And there's the real transition which from beyond school, we open up the possibilities, and now we have to keep working on opening up those possibilities for our students as they enter into adulthood and into their communities. I just want to be finished the budget presentation and looking at past and looking going forward with supporting our spec ed plan. I just want to finish by saying that we're really very, very proud of our learning. We're proud of our school and system staff learning as we work to continually connect our budget presentation, our special education plan, and our staff connect the students to their dreams. That's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Superintendent Edwards. Trustees? Trustee McAllister?
Trustee Edwards, could you comment on the mental health and addictions nurse partnership and how that's going to work?
Yes, mental health and addiction nurse, we have 1.5 mental health and addiction nurse for Upper Canada. It's a partnership with Community Care and Access. The mental health and addictions nurse is actually hired through Community Care and Access through the Southeast LHIN, and will works very closely with our two chief psychologists and our special services counselors, working with students often if they're coming out of treatment center through transitions from hospital, and working with individual students and families throughout the district.
Thank you.
What do we know about the use of the SIA computers? Anecdotally, we hear that there are closets full of machines unused, and the kids don't like the stigma attached to them.
Mm-hmm. So what we know anecdotally, and also in terms of as we go in with our collaborative learning and work within their schools, is that in the elementary schools, they're highly used. Laptops, the C equipment, the programs the students are learning them, the families, and that's where a lot of focus on the capacity building and for the students for it to be a tool. What we are finding, and we're working with students, and the example, we really are, work to have our students at our student success team meetings, so it is the right device for them to access their learning. Because what we are finding is for some students, it is the iPad. That is the device that they're working towards. For other students, it is an iPod Touch. For other students, it is the computer. As Jeremy said, we have close to 11,000 or 12,000 computers within our system. Our approach is that our programs are on all of our computers, so that they may or may not be carrying their computer home with them or around with them, but they are using other devices. And that's also one of the focus with our C equipment is actually building the capacity of our teachers. And there is a focus within the secondary teaching route. So really understanding the technology and what it means for the students.
So if a SIA computer isn't being used, then what happens to it?
Yeah, we've got a very good inventory system. So if his computers, SIA equipment is not being used anymore, this example of this, a girl, for example, she just doesn't need her laptop anymore because she's going to be using an iPad, and their programs are also in other computers within the school. So that does come back. It's refurbished and sent back out and used again. We have a very good inventory system for that. Compared to a couple of years ago where we were not able to track them as carefully. Susan Blair is excellent on that.
All right. Any other comments or questions, trustees? Director?
I think the trustees, in the coming budgets in the next couple of years, you're going to be vigilant in holding whatever minister is of education speak to the fire. Remind you, Ian and I had a traumatic event that we learned a great deal about, is that you just cannot have any surplus whatsoever in this area, because for whatever reason is perceived as, you know, you can keep a surplus in building schools, but don't have an organized surplus in special ed or it's gone. And I think we have to be vigilant in making sure that the most vulnerable kids, when we have lines of budgets and so forth, that they're really looked after and maintained. And I know that we learned a lesson there. Now, we did spend the $10 million anyway because the board had the courage to do that. But the fact is, it was a lesson for us to be vigilant with those budget lines. Watch it carefully. We do.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Superintendent Edwards. And that's it for budget tonight, right? Does anybody want to go tonight?
No.
Okay.
I just like to comment that they've really learned from Rick well how to create that tone.
Not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm gonna let that go.
Rick's like
okay, we'll move on now to an update on PPM 150. Mr. Gales, do you have anything to add to your written report?
Simply that appreciate knowing that the board supports the direction, the plan that is proposed in terms of investing in the cafeterias, recognizing that it is going to be being compliant. PPM 150 will not happen quickly. We're talking about cultural change, and cultural change is very slow. It took 30 years for the majority of the population to stop smoking. I don't think that you're going to see a rapid shift in people's eating habits, but it's an important issue that we need to work on and go forward with. A healthy mind and a healthy soul and a healthy body. And so that's really the proposal, is we need to move forward, keep our cafeterias open, and work in a partnership to do that.
But as a board, we believe in offering healthy options, and that's our ultimate goal, and that's the purpose of this plan. Okay. Any comments or questions on that?
Yes, just to let
You're
you
going to add some value this time, or?
I'll try to add some. When you see another budget presentation coming up, you'll see the work of Randy Rattan in our nutrition and our physical wellness. That is where we're doing, really making a commitment to, at the elementary and junior division, to spend a great deal of time working with kids and their families on healthy choices, because as Rick has said, we've really recognized the fact that this is cultural. And what we have found out is that the younger mums and dads, when they're preparing lunches, are really taking this stuff quite seriously. And little Joey or Bobby coming to school, they let their mom and dad know what's a good lunch. It doesn't sell the same way with the middle school kids right now, but we think we're planning it properly. Just to bring some added value.
All right, thanks for that. All right. Trustee McPherson?
Okay, Rick has used the term non-exhaustive and list of the challenges. I find the list rather exhausting, but are we actually prevented from letting staff drink coffee in the schools? Like, that's the last one. Are we actually?
I hope not.
Inability, oh, we can't sell it.
We can't sell it.
Okay. Never mind, I won't go there.
All right, so can I have, do we need to re-endorse this? Do you want this re-endorsed? No, we're good. We have a standing endorsement.
Adopt the plan and that would be fine.
All right, well, we've received it, so I think, is this additional, or is this just an update?
I think the key issues are that we are going to not tender for operators because no one will apply.
Okay.
We'll continue to work with our existing operators.
So that's
We are not-
so that's different then. I just want to know whether we need to send this to board for approval or just to receive it for information.
I think you should endorse the plan.
All right. Okay. All right. Trustee McAllister?
Yes, so moved.
Seconded by Trustee McMillan that the Committee of the Whole recommend the Upper Canada District School Board adopt the proposal to develop school cafeterias. Just change the word endorse, please, to adopt. And go ahead and cast your where am I? Okay.
Mine didn't come up. I'm in favor of it.
Yeah.
Trustee Buckland, you in favor?
I support that, yes.
All right, great, thanks. That passes unanimously. Thank you, Superintendent Gales, for shepherding this through. All right, I need a motion to move back into regular meeting. Trustee McMillan, Trustee Carpenter.
Sorry, who was it, seconder?
Trustee McMillan and Carpenter.
Let me look at your favor again.
Said something different. Trustee McMillan, Trustee Swan. You're okay, yeah? All right, sorry.
Got it.
Okay, report from Public Session Committee of the Whole, April 24th. We have one recommendation. This is that the Upper Canada District School Board request the Audit Committee establish a plan to monitor high-risk policies to report to the Committee of the Whole no later than 6 months. Moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Garrow. Any comments or questions? Okay. Okay, that passes, thank you. Superintendent Patterson, you have anything to add tonight? I did receive a letter from the minister saying that she expected us to follow along and approve the whatever, or to get on the bus, I guess is a better way of putting it. Have you received anything else?
Yes, Chair Petersma, today we received a B memo, basically that assists us in the implementation of the OSSTF Memorandum of Understanding. So as you know, about mid-April, the government and OSSTF arrived at a Memorandum of Understanding, and we've been waiting this time to receive some further information from the ministry as we go forward in implementation. So we did receive that today. I think the only other thing I'd like to say, well, I guess 2 points. One is we have established negotiation dates with 2 of our bargaining units, that being PSSP and our OSSTF Occasional Teachers Bargaining Unit, and we are in the process of determining dates for our contract teachers. we have are to commit either between 3 to 6 days for local bargaining, and that's to be done by the end of June. So as you can imagine, time is tight, but we're doing our best to look for those opportunities. With regard to ETFO, I know that there were discussions ongoing with the government, and at this point I know that they are not in discussion, but that's not to say there aren't future dates scheduled. And lastly, you may be aware that there is a joint union, government, and employer committee that's taking a look at the hiring practices regulation. That's Regulation 274. And that, of course, we have some employers have some issues with that regulation and are seeking some changes. And the unions, I guess, have varying opinions on that. But the government is working with, well, all three parties, I guess, are working together to try to achieve something that assists the employers and also recognizes the needs of the unions as well.
Okay, Trustee McAllister.
Superintendent Patterson, is there a point to these local negotiations?
We, through you, Chair, we certainly entered in good faith bargaining last fall, and we were not successful, and OSSTF was actually told to stand down. So we still have items that we would like to discuss, and if we can work together to arrive at mutually beneficial solutions, then yes, there's certainly a point to the negotiations.
Thank you. Supplementary. At the end of the 6 days, is that the time frame? And we have not reached an agreement. What then?
We can make use of the collective bargaining legislation that is within our that is described or prescribed in law. We can go to the Ministry of Labor, etc. But the government has also made it very clear that negotiations, I can't remember right off the top of my head, I believe it should conclude by June the 28th, or are expected to conclude by June the 28th.
Trustee McPherson.
In a worst case scenario, what happens if we can't reach an agreement? Are the contracts imposed provincially?
Through you, Chair, the direction that we've received is that the current contract exists with the memorandum of understanding appended to it. So any of the changes that are the results of the memorandum of understanding are attached to the current collective agreement. And any of the items that might be negotiated cannot impact in any way those items that were determined through the memorandum of understanding. So in that regard, we will not be obviously looking at such matters as salary or sick leave, etc., because those are all determined through the memorandum of understanding.
The government mentions the importance for us to get on with it multiple times in the letter. So I think we know what their line is on it, so we'll get on with it.
Or not?
Any other comments? Thank you, Superintendent Patterson. SEAC.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to report on the last two meetings. SEAC heard a presentation from Developmental Services Ontario. David Monroe and Paul McGarvey read the process for intakes and assessments for individuals with developmental disabilities. And they reviewed the new process for eligibility and the new Developmental Disabilities Act. And What they outlined was not a very pretty picture, to be honest with you, because they described a dire situation outlining 4 years of no increase to funding, an increase in wait lists, the need to help clients in the transition from school to employment, and the loss of service at home funding. So that was not a very pretty picture. The principal, Nancy Holman, then went on to inform SEAC about 2 tools that they're using. They're acronyms, but they're MAPS and PATHs. They're planning tools which use graphics to collect information and develop future plans for students. Both tools support goal setting, action plans, and the involvement of people who would create a step-by-step path to a desirable future. They touched on the role of the agencies and the school as a hub for this transition process. They also talked about the training that a staff will need. At the last night's meeting, Superintendent of Business Rick Gales presented a budget update to SEAC. It was followed by an explanation on the student engagement budget by Superintendent Edwards, which you just heard a few moments ago. And the committee discussed the work of the SEAC ad hoc committee, which wants to, and I think they've given notice, to make a presentation with recommendations to this board at some point in the near future, and they're working on that now. And I must say that it was enriching and heartwarming to hear the members of SEAC talk about the high caliber of care and attention and service that our spec ed programs give to our special ed students. So, have I missed anything, Trustee McPherson?
No, just after you left last night, they are going to be putting together a letter to forward to Greg first, based on these cuts. One of the issues that has come up in both discussions was you can be put on a waiting list, and you could be put on that waiting list when you turn 18, and you could sit there until there's a limited pot of money. That is part of the issue. There's no money being added to it. So unless somebody comes off the list, there is no movement onto the list. And it's the group between 18 and 21 that we find at SEAC particularly disturbing, because those students still have the potential to be in school. And all of a sudden, they're losing support services at home. And so, as our commitment to transitioning as many students onto a successful post-secondary career, we feel that it is not going to make our job any easier. And so they're working hard to prepare something that is quite concise. There's a lot of correspondence coming to us from other boards on the same issues. And I think that they're hoping to present to looking for maybe some more further board action.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Director McDonald, Officer report.
Thank you. In light of the time, I've shortened my report from 60 minutes to 45 minutes. Just quickly, last board of directors meeting was a couple weekends ago. Some of the main things that we went over, and there is a fairly good summary that's put out in the FAST report, so you see a good overview of what took place at the meeting. A couple of things that I just want to talk about is first and foremost the copyright issue. There is money that is starting to be kind of funneled out into schools as a result of the change in the copyright process. And I want to say fair and free trade. It's not fair and free trade, but in any event, there's a change in how it is determined whether schools can copy material without having to pay copyright fees. So a significant amount of money being doled out across the province, across the country for that matter. One of the things that we do need to do, though, is make sure that we have the right signage in place around our photocopiers, making our staff aware of what is permissible to be copied without any copyright payments to be made, a lot of different information. So there are some old pieces of information that were posted in the past. We need to make sure that the current information is posted and all of our staff are aware. That's a requirement on us as the employer to ensure that our staff are aware of that. If we were ever audited by the Copyright Control Board, whatever they're called, we could get into some issues if they found out we had the wrong information there. One of the other things that I did want to talk about real quickly is the motions that we put forward around policy changes. The first motion was on the act of OPSPA being a lead or having the voice of public school boards in Ontario for negotiations. That was supported by executive, and we'll be moving forward with those comments to the AGM. The second one was around the meetings of chairs. The meetings of chairs, executive decided to have no comment on it. They have three choices: support, not recommend, and no comment. And they chose the no comment route. I spoke to the matter at the board of directors meeting and provided what I hope to be additional clarification as to the rationale for having the meeting. In fact, supporting the fact that chairs did request this type of meeting to be conducted and also supported and facilitated with OPSPA. The intention not to have OPSPA on the wings, but certainly be part of it. So that will be brought forward at the AGM for vote, but no comment from executive. That's the highlight of the meeting. There were lots of activities that did take place through the course of the weekend, but certainly those are the quick salient facts, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. And Sydney, you're going to provide your report next meeting. Okay. Comments?
Just like you to buy your tickets for the Jeep from the Champions for Kids Foundation from me. And you might be tempted to go to the front desk, but I have my tickets available for you here. 1 for 20 and 3 for 50.
So do you get like a pizza party if you sell the most?
No, I don't. I can't win either, but I'm trying to get rid of my tickets, so don't leave without buying your tickets.
I'll buy my own.
Okay.
Okay. All right. The motion to adjourn. Trustee McMillan, seconded by Trustee Karkner. Thanks, everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks.